Being a high school teenager means cheering for your team, laughing in class, snapping selfies with your best friend, sharing dinner with your family, and discovering love for the first time. High school is a mix of highs and lows for everyone. But for two teenage girls, life took a devastating turn when a killer stepped through the open gate. South Africa is beautiful. It has oceans, canyons, mountains, deserts, and tons of wildlife. I'm talking elephants, whales, and yes, even penguins. South Africa is also a country with a long and fraught history. It was originally colonized by the Dutch in the mid-1600s, occupied by the British until the 1900s, and under brutal apartheid until 1994. That is when Nelson Mandela was elected as the first president representing the African National Congress. South Africa is divided into provinces, and today's case is set in the province of Northwest, in a tiny cattle farming town called Stella. The name Republic of Stellaland was coined in 1882 after a war was fought on the territory. A group of white mercenaries who won the war were given farmland as their war prize, and 150 years later, most of the land has been passed down through families for generations. The entire country is only 7% white, and only 14% of the population speaks Afrikaans as their first language, which I find fascinating. However, the population of Stella itself is 70% white Christians who speak Afrikaans, which is the third most spoken language in South Africa after Zulu, the most popular language, and Xhosa, which is the second most popular. Stella is on National Route 18 between Mafikeng, the capital of Northwest, and the city of Vryburg. It has around 1,000 residents, mostly cattle farmers, one pub, one primary school, and one secondary school, so it is quite a small community comparatively speaking. Every October, the community holds a county fair called Beesfees. The Beesfees brings a lot of tourism. People come from all over to watch rugby matches, attend cattle auctions, and see farming presentations. The rest of the year, Stella is pretty quiet. People don't lock their doors. The only fences in town are to keep the livestock in safe places on the land. And just like every small town, there are systemic problems: gender violence, racism, and of course, gossiping neighbors. But Stella overall is known as a great place to grow up. Everybody knows one another, everyone looks out for each other, and it's known as a great place to raise children. As an American, it helps me to think of Stella as similar to a Midwest rural community here in the United States, where everyone knows everyone, and it takes a village to raise a child, as they say. So it's nice to have a close-knit community. We're going to be learning about two young women in this case and how their paths crossed. I'll start with Marna Engelbrecht. She was born in 2001 and grew up outside of Stella, on her dad's farm. This is part of the Vryburg district. The city of Vryburg has a population of about 63,000 people, and people who live in Stella will drive from Stella to Vryburg to do their shopping and business. Marna's dad, Stefanus, was a farmer whose job was to bore holes to create wells on people's farms. He trained farmhands and was well respected in their community. Marna's mother, Rihanna, was a kindergarten teacher in Kamjesgrun, and she was a strong woman who loved children. They welcomed their first daughter, Rihanna, 2 years after Marna was born. Marna and Rihanna actually looked like twins, with their big hazel eyes, tan skin, and long, straight, side-parted dark hair. It was clear that they were related. Sometimes it was hard to tell them apart. Marna was very family-oriented and particularly close with her dad. His nickname for her was Marna Muis, which is the Afrikaans word for mouse, because Marna was adorable, shy, and loved animals. Marna went to a nursery school in Kamjesgrun, which is a town close to Stella, and primary school in Vryburg. She was a bookworm, very polite and hardworking as a student, but when she got out of class, she spent all of her time outdoors. She loved bottle feeding their baby goats, sheep, and cows, and playing with her dogs, including the family dog, Nero. They also had horses, and by the time Marna was a teenager, she had convinced her father, Stefanus, to enroll her in horseback riding lessons. She had her very own horse, and Marna loved to feed it sugar cubes, which I think is adorable. From day one, Marna wanted to spend the rest of her life with animals, because let's face it, a lot of times they're just better than humans. She planned to become a veterinarian. Sometimes her family would be driving home from school, and Marna would see an injured animal on the side of the road, and she would beg them to pick it up so she could nurse it back to health. She was smart, quick-witted, but also stubborn, and you couldn't tell Marna no. She always stood up for what she thought was right and what she wanted. When Marna reached grade 8, she enrolled in Stella High School. Now I know it's different than here in the States, where high school begins in the 9th grade, but there weren't many secondary schools for rural kids to attend, so this school became the South African equivalent of a private boarding school. 5 days a week, boys and girls would go to school and stay overnight in 2 separate hostels. The girls stayed in Huizen, a 2-story building with a common room, communal bathrooms, and shared bedrooms. Here's what the bathrooms look like. Lots of sinks and showers in a row. The rooms look like this: a simple twin bed, some furniture accents, and another example with a bed and a desk. Here's the front entrance to the girls' dormitory. The entryway to the boys says man cave. There's also a stairway to the 2nd story. Here's an example of one of the boys' rooms. You can decorate it a bit to make it feel like home, but on the weekends, kids are picked up by their parents and driven back home, sometimes over an hour away. Here's what the campus looks like from a bird's eye view, and here's what the front looks like where the gates open and close. After hours, it's secured with a fence that includes barbed wire on top, and it's in the middle of a lot of farmland. Not much goes on around the actual school, but they have a lot to do there. They have nice sports facilities and tennis courts, all along a dirt road. The students all wear uniforms, the girls in blue skirts and button-down shirts, some with ties or vests, and the boys in blue jackets. There is a lot to do on campus: events, themed parties to celebrate different accomplishments, holidays, and of course athletic events. There are so many athletic activities on campus that it's unbelievable. These kids are very active, and that's the point of this boarding school: to get kids off their phones, off the computer, and to have them being social with one another, while also focusing on fitness and things like that. The residences on campus house 71 residents, of which about half are boys and half are girls, so about 32 are boys and 39 are girls, in 2 separate boarding houses, which are private from one another, of course, with rules about when boys and girls can come together at their respective hostels and hang out. Marna was shy and introverted. She was also petite and often overlooked, but that first year of high school, she became one of the stars of her class, literally. Stella's honor system was called the Order of the Star, and it functioned like the Olympics. Every quarter of the year, the top scholars in each grade got a gold, silver, or bronze medal for their achievements, which really did encourage them to work hard. Marna got the bronze medal several times. She studied hard and excelled in science and math. She began hanging out with a girl in her grade, and this is the second young woman I'll be introducing you to in this case. Her name is Sharnelle. Sharnelle was Marna's complete opposite, but you know what they say, opposites attract. Sharnelle had blonde hair, big green eyes, and a really bright and beautiful smile. She was very outgoing. Marna and Sharnelle clicked like puzzle pieces, though it was no surprise because they actually already knew each other. It turns out Rihanna, Marna's mom, had played songs during Sharnelle's parents' wedding reception back in the day. Marna and Sharnelle actually went to the same daycare and had been best friends at the age of 3. But over the years, they lost contact throughout elementary school. Once reunited at Stella, Marna and Sharnelle spent every waking hour together. They became roommates in one of the hostels, which is like a dorm room at Stella. They went to each other's homes every weekend, and Marna met everyone in Sharnelle's extended family. They hiked together, rode horses, fished, played netball, hung out on the farm, and recorded videos on their phones. The girls would lip-sync to popular Vines. You guys remember Vines? And they would use SpongeBob voice filters, then break into laughter. The girls had a lot of fun together and were like typical teenagers. Marna was known for her sense of humor, which she got from her dad, Stephanus. She would make jokes on her Instagram and Facebook and leave it to her dad. He would always comment on her posts in Afrikaans. For example, Marna posted a selfie with Sharnelle, and Stefanis commented, "Let's see who the dads are. They must be pretty handsome. I think you can understand their humor." By the time Marna and Sharnelle reached the 11th grade, they were a package deal. Whenever you saw one, you saw the other. It was expected that they would always be together. Marna actually said, "We've been friends for so long, I can't remember which one of us is the bad influence." They were always joking and laughing together. I'm going to take this opportunity to tell you more about Sharnelle. She was born on March 8, 2001, to Ronnie and Sanja. Sharnelle's nickname was actually Lala or Lai. She went by both, and her Instagram handle was Sharnelle_Lai. In North Africa, Lala means lady or queen, so perhaps it was related to that. And in other cultures, L means you talk a lot. You tell me if you're from South Africa, and I've heard this nickname and can offer a meaning. Sharnelle was the only child, and she grew up on her father Ronnie's farm in Delaville. Ronnie grew potatoes, owned cattle, and was a feed supervisor. Ronnie would make food for animals, take samples, and then send them to labs to ensure quality control. He managed several employees and was in charge of inventory. He was a busy guy, so busy that he and his wife Sona ended up getting a divorce when Sharnelle was quite young. Despite their parents' separation, Sharnelle had a very strong relationship with both of them. Sona ended up moving to a town called Koster, where she worked at a holiday resort, and on weekdays, Sharnelle lived at Ronnie's farm. Growing up, every Sunday, she would have a long phone call with her mom, and 1 week a month, she would drive the 3 hours to Koster so she could hang out and have mother-daughter time. Ronnie ended up getting remarried, and his new wife's name was Anna. She had a son named Eston, who was 7 years younger than Sharnelle. Sharnelle had always wanted a younger sibling, so she and Eston spent their days outside, fishing and playing sports, while Sharnelle talked his ear off. Another reason I think Loli could have meant talkative. The closest person Sharnelle had to a sister was her cousin Lenari, who was 3 years older. They made lip-syncing videos together, just like with Marna. That was the cool thing to do in 2014, and honestly, not much has changed with TikTok these days. When Sharnelle went to Stella High, which was 45 minutes away from her father's farm and 2 hours away from Koster where her mom lived, Ronnie was sad that his little girl would be gone 5 days out of the week. But Sharnelle loved being independent. However, she also loved her family, so her stepmother would pick her up every Friday like clockwork. Sharnelle would walk in the door and say, "What's for dinner?" And then she would spend the rest of the night with her dad. When Sharnelle reconnected with Marna, Ronnie was thrilled. Having Marna in the house was like having a second daughter around. The girls were so close that when Sharnelle would go to bed at her house and Marna was there spending the night, Marna would go downstairs to chat with her family. Lenari said that Marna and Sharnelle were hilarious. They always cracked each other up, and everyone else as well. Sharnelle was also very popular. She was gorgeous, and she stood out with her long blonde hair and deep tan because she spent a lot of time outdoors in the sun. She loved hiking, horses, and taking pictures of nature. She actually wanted to be a professional photographer. Her dad thought she should be a model, that she should be in front of the camera, but Sharnelle wasn't interested. She thought that would involve a lot of traveling. Sharnelle wanted to stay close to her friends and family. She was sporty, sweet, good-natured, and had a childlike enthusiasm for everything she did. She was very spontaneous and saw the best in others. Sharnelle was also a people-pleaser, which could be seen as a flaw. She didn't like conflict, so she had a tendency to prioritize others before herself to keep things drama-free. Marna and Sharnelle were a lot alike. They were best friends after all, but they were fundamentally different. Marna was quiet, funny, and had a stubborn streak, while Sharnelle was bubbly, bright, and agreeable. I think in some cases there's a tendency to call two best friends the girls, but I'm really trying not to blend them together because it's important that you know them as two individual people and get to know Marna and Sharnelle for who they were. But the more time you spend with someone, the more you do take on some of their characteristics. In March of 2017, 16-year-old Sharnelle met 17-year-old Xander Bilesma. Sharnelle liked that Xander was tall, thought he was handsome, and liked that he played rugby. He was quiet and mysterious, but when you got to know him, he was charming. Xander was immediately infatuated with Sharnelle and treated her like a queen, doing anything for her. They started dating, and Sharnelle brought Xander home to meet Ronnie and her stepmom Anna, and they liked him. Xander was polite, respectful, and helped out around the farm. Sharnelle's cousin, Linari, noticed that Xander would do anything for Sharnelle. If she called him and he was an hour's drive away, it didn't matter. He would drop everything to come meet her. They also liked that Xander was close with his mom, Mara, and that they went to the same church, a Dutch Reformed church. The families were actually pretty close, and funny enough, Xander was related to Sharnelle's BFF, Marna. Yes, it's a coincidence, but Xander's mom, Mara, was cousins with Marna's mom, Reunited. That meant Xander was Marna's second cousin. But just so I'm not confusing anything, he's not dating his second cousin. Marna is not the one dating Xander, it's Sharnelle. Just wanted to clear that up before you thought that's where I was going with that. Growing up, Marna never actually hung out with her second cousin, but now that Sharnelle and Xander were together, all three of them were inseparable. Of course, Marna approved of Sharnelle's choice in a boyfriend since Xander was her cousin and all that. So I'll give you the rundown on Xander. Xander's parents, his mom's name was Mara and his dad's name was Monty, used to be in law enforcement. Mara worked in farm administration. They got divorced when Xander was in elementary school and he moved to Monty's farm near Freiburg. When Xander met Sharnelle, he was finishing up his senior year, which is known as the matriculate year, or matrick, in South Africa. He liked fishing, hunting, wearing camo a lot, and Sharnelle thought his style was cute. They often engaged in deep conversations about growing up with divorced parents and their plans for the future. But after about 6 months of dating, the honeymoon phase was over, and Sharnelle started to see cracks in the relationship. Xander could come off as a bit possessive. He didn't like it when Sharnelle hung out with her friends instead of him, and Marna was confused as to why Sharnelle wasn't inviting her over on the weekends anymore. She felt like Xander was kind of isolating Sharnelle from her loved ones. When Marna learned that Xander would actually check Charell's phone to see who she was texting, she got worried. It seemed like there were some major trust issues in their relationship. Sharnelle then confided in Marna that, even though she loved Xander, she wasn't sure it was going to work out. After giving it a lot of thought, she decided it would be best if they broke up. I mean, he was leaving high school, she was still going to be there, and she was feeling a little smothered. So she finally let him know how she was feeling and broke it off with Xander. But of course, Xander apologized. He said this was his first serious relationship, and if she took him back, they could make it work. He promised to work harder to make sure things turned out better. So Sharnelle agreed, but over time, the relationship became on again, off again, back and forth. Xander still acted jealous and controlling. Sharnelle decided the relationship was toxic, but every time she tried to break it off, Xander apologized. They both truly cared for and loved one another. It's hard when you're young. It's really hard to make that decision on what to do. You don't really want to lose the person, but you also know that maybe it's not the best. At Stella High, there's a very big ceremony called Matrick Farewell for the seniors, basically prom. Each year there's always a theme, and students spend a lot of time decorating and preparing. The girls dress up really fancy, the men in sharp-looking suits, and they pull up in fancy cars. Xander and Sharnelle were on during this period. So when Xander invited Sharnelle to be his date, she happily agreed. It would be an exciting occasion because it wasn't her time yet. It was Xander's, and she was excited to go. In September of 2017, Sharnelle went to Coster to pick out a dress with her mom. She found one that she was obsessed with. She felt like Cinderella dressing up for the ball, which really sounds perfect for this event considering some of the dresses from previous years. When Sharnelle told Xander she had already bought a dress, Xander was kind of put off by it. He told her he had already designed and custom-made a dress for her because he didn't want her to worry about the little details. Xander asked Sharnelle to show up in her regular clothes without makeup or jewelry, and Sharnelle agreed. She showed up without her magical dress. It was still hanging in her closet. Then, Xander's mom, Misha, did Sharnelle's hair and some light makeup. The new dress was actually beautiful. It was a black lace dress. I have a picture of Sharnelle wearing it, and Xander in his blue suit jacket, and they look stunning. The theme that year was Around the World. They decorated with things like the Eiffel Tower and the Statue of Liberty. As students came in through the red carpet, they were actually boarding a plane, Air France. You can see it in the background of the picture. Xander and Sharnelle made their way toward the event. Some of the students putting on the event were dressed as flight attendants and captains, and the sign said, Gate 12, now boarding. Inside, each table was decorated as a different country. It appears from the sign outside that Xander and Sharnelle sat at the London table. I also think that Xander's parents were in attendance. I think the parents of all the seniors actually come to this event, but they don't sit at the same table. His parents were sitting at the Egypt table. They had a great night. There's somewhat of a fashion show at this event where everyone shows off their outfit. Here's the couple coming inside arm in arm. Later, Xander was on stage, but I didn't see a picture of Sharnelle, so I was thinking it was just the graduating class that walks the catwalk while the crowd blows bubbles. For many young women, occasions like this, like dressing up for homecoming or prom, are usually more fun than the actual event itself. Getting ready with your friends, doing your hair and makeup. And Sharnelle was independent. She had no problem dressing herself or picking out her own special dress. So Xander's actions actually rubbed her the wrong way. It seemed like a sweet gesture, but given the history of Xander's possessiveness and jealousy, it could have been a way to make sure she wasn't dressed in a way he didn't approve of. Sure enough, the rest of 2017 saw Sharnelle and Xander's relationship rapidly go downhill. They started having fights, about none other than her makeup and clothing. But through all of this, Sharnelle was always positive. She never said anything bad about Xander to her parents or her friends. Eventually, Sharnelle confided in her best friend, Marna, that she wasn't happy. Marna told Sharnelle to break up with Xander for good, to get it over with. He's not good for you. In December, Sharnelle posted on Facebook. She said, "When you give your heart to someone, remember to keep a piece for yourself too." And in January, she ended her and Xander's 11-month relationship. Sharnelle was actually finally over him. He was old news. But Xander was in denial that the relationship was truly over. He graduated in December, but he still called and texted Sharnelle every day. Sometimes he would show up at Stella High to talk to her. She didn't block him or anything like that because she didn't think it would do anything but make him upset. However, she felt like Xander was starting to act kinda crazy, and she felt like she dodged a bullet. Over time, Sharnelle and Marna started hanging out with other groups of friends, including their friend Brandon Victor, another rugby player from Stella. They'd known each other since they were 13. Brandon was in his senior year. He was handsome, smart, and athletic. It was known to almost everyone that Brandon had a crush on Sharnelle, but he never wanted to be disrespectful, ruin her relationship with Xander, or hurt their friendship. So he always tried to keep it quiet. Now that Sharnelle was single and spending time with Brandon, she started having feelings for him. She trusted him and confided in him when Xander wouldn't leave her alone. Brandon was patient and protective throughout the whole thing. Though, like most rugby players, he definitely had a rough streak. Sharnelle was cautious. She didn't want to jump into anything new, so she tried to let things grow naturally, which they did. By May of 2018, Brandon and Sharnelle started holding hands and were more than friends, but they weren't ready to admit it to everyone. Sharnelle wasn't exactly 100% over Xander. It happens, it takes time. She told Marna she missed Xander, explaining that he made her heart race 1,000,000 kilometers an hour. But Marna told her that a good relationship would make her heartbeat feel normal, because sometimes it's the lust that keeps people together, even in a toxic relationship. When Sharnelle asked if she should date Brandon, Marna approved. This meant a lot because at first, Marna was happy that Sharnelle was dating Xander, but over time, she no longer approved of him at all. With her best friend's support, Sharnelle felt like she was moving in the right direction. In South Africa, high schools have 4 quarters, and the second quarter runs from the beginning of April to mid-June. So on May 25, 2018, it was an average Friday for 18-year-old Brandon, 16-year-old Marna, and 17-year-old Sharnelle. They were in the middle of classes and rugby season. Brandon was going to Coster that weekend with the boys' rugby team for a game, and he invited both girls to ride on the school bus and watch the game. Sharnelle figured this was a great opportunity to visit her mom as well, hang out with Brandon, and spend the weekend with her best friend. It was perfect, and Brandon was thrilled that Sharnelle wanted to join. So on Saturday after the game, he had a plan. He was finally going to ask Sharnelle to be his official girlfriend. The afternoon of the 25th, Rihanna drove home from Camille Kindergarten and stopped by Stella High School to see her daughter. Marna had told both of her parents she wasn't actually going to come home that weekend, so her mom figured she would at least come by to say hello. When she got there, she stayed in the car, and Marna came outside the hostel. They chatted for just a moment, and then Marna waved goodbye as Rihanna drove back to the farm. Little did she know that that was going to be the last time she would ever see her daughter alive. Marna and Sharnelle grabbed dinner together that night, and then they packed for the weekend. They hung out in their bedroom on the ground floor of the hostel, which was empty because everyone was gone on the weekends. People don't usually stay there. They were the only girls going to the rugby game. Everyone else had gone home. Marna and Sharnelle chatted for hours, and they were jumping up and down on the beds. They were just having a great time together, and that's when Sharnelle got a call from her dad, Ronnie. When Sharnelle picked up the phone, he could hear the girls cracking up in the background. Ronnie remembers them this way: happy, carefree, and excited for a weekend sleepover. After they got off the phone, Sharnelle and Marna visited the hostel mom, Christelle Yasta, who lived on the premises. Christelle agreed to wake them up at 6 o'clock in the morning so they could get ready to get on the bus. The bus would depart sharply at 6:30 from the boys' hostel, which is a short walk away. So, Sharnelle and Marna asked Christelle to keep the hostel gate open that night. Every night, it's usually locked closed, and of course, they wouldn't have the key. They wanted the option to go on a spontaneous walk that night, so Christelle agreed. As a hostel mom, she'd seen a lot of things in her time and knew Marna and Sharnelle were responsible students. She trusted that they would be back at a reasonable hour. The gates were kind of a formality anyway. It's not hard to climb over them if someone really wanted to get in. It's just a signal that things are closed and to keep everything secure. So she went and unlocked the gate and then went to bed. As for Sharnelle and Marna, they hung out, drank coffee in the common room, but by 11:30, they were bored. The night was still young in their opinion, so Sharnelle texted Brandon and invited him over. Brandon got permission from the hostel dad on their side to keep the gate open to the boys' dorm, so he was able to go over to the girls' hostel and hang out for a bit while the adults slept. They partied into the early morning hours. Sharnelle's mom, Sanja, was an early riser and woke up in Coster around 6 o'clock in the morning. When she checked her phone, she saw a text from her daughter. Sharnelle wrote in Afrikaans, "Mommy, I just wanted to say that I love you, Mommy, and I'm sorry." The thing is, the word sorry was spelled wrong. Sanja looked at the time that this text message was sent, 4:17 a.m. She wondered what in the world Sharnelle was doing awake at that hour, and why she would be apologizing. Something seemed off. Sharnelle never misspelled words. She always checked to make sure her texts were spelled correctly, and she never sent a text at 4 o'clock in the morning. Sanja tried calling her daughter multiple times, but Sharnelle never answered. All the calls actually went to her voicemail. Sanja knew that Sharnelle was supposed to be getting ready to go on the bus by now, so she was just hoping that Sharnelle was busy brushing her teeth or packing her bag, but she was worried. So she called her ex-husband Ronnie and asked him if Sharnelle was still visiting. Ronnie actually woke up to this phone call. The phone was ringing, and Ronnie picked up. He told Sanja he talked to Sharnelle the night before, and Sharnelle would be in Coster. He reassured her that everything was fine, and they ended the call. That's when Ronnie went to his phone and saw multiple text messages from Sharnelle. The first was at 3:42 a.m. It was a picture of his daughter wearing a bra with no shirt, with a caption, "I love you, Brandon," which was quite an embarrassing thing to send your dad, and also it was sent so early in the morning. The second text was at 4:17 and said in Afrikaans, "Daddy, I'm sorry. Marna and I are leaving this place." Ronnie felt his heart fill with dread. Leaving this place sounded odd. Were they leaving the hostel? What in the world was going on? It almost sounded like the girls might have been intoxicated or something. At 6:15 that morning, Ronnie called the headmaster of Stella High School, Richard Hobson. Hobson had actually just learned the news and told Ronnie that Sharnelle and Marna were dead. I can't even imagine thinking everything was okay, getting these really weird text messages, and then getting a message like that, just point blank, the girls are not alive. The hostel mom, Christelle, had woken up the morning of the 26th just before 6 a.m. She put on her jacket, left her bedroom, and passed the communal bathroom. Outside the bathroom, she noticed a strange clump of dark hair on the floor. But in her morning haze, she looked at it and couldn't figure out what it was. Did it come from a brush? What was it doing there? So she kept walking. Near the bathroom was a staircase between the first and second floors. It was a hovering staircase that formed a balcony over an alcove. In the alcove were pink couch cushions where girls could sit and hang out. There was a stack of mountain bikes leaned up against each other on the underside of the staircase. The stair rail was pink, and the panel underneath the stairs was also painted pink. Christelle rounded the staircase, and that's when she noticed a long green nylon rope tied to the stair railing. What she saw next made her freeze. Dangling inches above the stack of bicycles were a pair of white-socked feet, a long pair of pants, and above that, hanging lifelessly, was Sharnelle. Christelle couldn't move. She was in complete shock and just stood there for a minute, frozen by horror and devastation. She snapped herself out of it and ran outside to find help. The boys' hostel gate was open. The rugby players were milling around, eating breakfast and gathering equipment. Christelle was banging on the hostel dad's door. She couldn't even explain to him what was going on and didn't want any of the rugby players to find out, not before the police arrived. When the hostel dad saw Sharnelle hanging by the staircase, he knew this was not something she could have survived. Sharnelle had clearly taken her own life, but it just didn't make sense. Both of them knew Sharnelle. She was vivacious, talkative, and loved her life. So they wondered, had she been hiding thoughts of depression? What would have driven her to this point? It was devastating, unbelievable, and confusing. The hostel dad called 911 and reported that one of the students had taken her own life. At this point, with all the chaos, they decided not to alert Marna or even try to find out where she was that morning. They figured she was asleep in her room, but later, when they checked, she wasn't there. When Christelle waited for the South African Police Service, SAPS, the house dad found Brandon and asked him if he knew Marna's phone number. Brandon had a bad feeling. He asked the house dad if Marna and Sharnelle were okay, but the house dad wouldn't say. When Brandon got on the bus and noticed that Sharnelle and Marna weren't there, he was worried. He thought something might have happened, perhaps an accident. What if Sharnelle had been hurt and Marna went with her to the hospital? He asked his coach what was happening, but the coach told him he wouldn't be able to provide any details until they arrived in Koster. It was an excruciating 2-hour drive, and Brandon spent the entire time panicking. The Stella police station was literally half a mile away, so it did not take them long to start the investigation. Sergeant Zagaris Hum answered the call and arrived at 6:40 a.m. after calling for backup from the Freiburg PD. When Sergeant Hum approached, he introduced himself to the two adults standing outside. They told him that Sharnelle had taken her life on the stairs and that her best friend Marna was missing. Hum assessed the crime scene and then searched the building for Marna. He went through the entire upstairs floor and couldn't find her. Then he went to her bedroom on the downstairs floor and couldn't find her there either. But as he rounded the corner to where the bathroom was, he saw that clump of long brown hair on the floor outside of the bathroom. The sergeant entered the bathroom and saw a young woman slumped down on her knees, leaning away from the sink. It looked like she had been in an upright position, then fallen forward, with her head against the floor. Around her neck was a long strap tied to one of the sink taps above her head. The strap looked like it belonged to a backpack or a handbag, and she had fallen forward due to her weight, causing the handle to snap. The scene was horrific, and Sergeant Humm assumed that Marna had also taken her own life. He wondered if she had seen her best friend and decided she could not live without her, or if it had been the opposite. It still didn't make sense. Most people in Stella grew up in religious households, and taking one's own life was considered a sin. Why would two young girls choose this fate? It was very concerning and unusual. Sergeant Humm called in the forensic investigators, and at this point, paramedics had arrived. They checked Marna's pulse, but found none. It was much harder for them to reach Sharnelle, and since this was a potential crime scene, they didn't want to touch anything to avoid contaminating the DNA. Though unlikely, they had to make sure that Sharnelle wasn't still breathing. The paramedics went halfway up the flight of stairs and, wearing gloves, touched the rope to move her closer. Sadly, Sharnelle had also passed away. Sergeant Humm had the horrible task of calling Sharnelle and Marna's families. They were half asleep, eating breakfast, when Stephanus heard the phone ring. He answered it, and the look on his face was like he had just seen a ghost. His wife knew right away that something was wrong. When Marna's mom, Rena, finally found her ringing phone, she frantically answered it. There was an officer on the other end telling her that her beloved daughter and her best friend had taken their lives. All three of them jumped in the car. Rihanna prayed to God for strength. She had now lost 2 daughters, and it was self-inflicted. That didn't make sense. Both girls were happy. They had their entire lives ahead of them. Why would they choose this? That was the question. When Marna's parents showed up, they rushed to find her. Her sister was there with her mom and dad. They were led to the bathroom, and when her mom took one look at Marna, she said, "No, this is murder." They say a mother always knows, and by the way, Marna's body was hunched over, placed with her head on the floor. It didn't look like she had fallen forward. It looked like someone had put her there, and Marna's mother was convinced of it. At the same time, Ronnie was making phone calls. He found out about the deaths from the head of the school. First, Ronnie called his brother Louis, the dad of Sharnelle's cousin Limari. Ronnie lived 45 minutes away from Stella, and Louis lived much closer. He asked his brother to please drive over to the high school and be there while paramedics and police arrived. Louis agreed and called Limari to tell her the news. Then Ronnie called Sanja. Sanja had been worried sick for 45 minutes and immediately picked up when Ronnie revealed that their daughter was dead. I can't even imagine the wall of grief that hit her, knowing she would never hear Sharnelle's voice on Sunday afternoons ever again. Sanja and Ronnie hopped in their cars and drove to the scene, though Sanja had a much longer drive ahead of her, 2 hours from Coster. Louis got there 20 minutes before anyone else and went inside to see Sharnelle. 2 more police officers had arrived and were calling this an unnatural death investigation. When Louis saw his niece still hanging by a rope, he asked the officers to please cut her down. It was a horrific way to see her, completely powerless, but the police refused. They said they had to wait until the forensic investigator showed up to rule out a potential homicide. Louis was so upset but decided to wait for his brother to get there and make a decision. When Ronnie showed up and Sharnelle was still dangling in the air, can you even imagine? He was outraged. He demanded that the police take her down, and when they wouldn't, he asked Louis to help him because he was going to take matters into his own hands. I don't blame him. I could not bear to see someone like that, let alone my child. They moved the bikes out of the way and removed the wall cushions from underneath the stairs. Louis went up the stairs and cut the rope. Sharnelle was lowered into Ronnie's arms. Ronnie sank to the ground, running his hands through his daughter's hair as the police looked on. They didn't want to interfere with this grief, even though there was a good chance that Ronnie's DNA would be all over the scene. It makes me sad that anyone has to worry about fingerprints and DNA when their daughter has just died. It adds insult to injury, but at the same time, I can respect and understand how important it is for the scene not to be contaminated. Ronnie accepted that the police had to continue their investigation. He sat Sharnelle down on the cushions and went to see Marna's body and to stand with Marna's mom, dad, and sister. He noticed that Sharnelle, when he brought her down, was significantly warmer than Marna. Ronnie told the police this, and they took note of the observation. As the family stood outside the girls' hostel waiting for answers, Brandon was on that bus riding to Coster. He texted and called Sharnelle over and over, but she never picked up. When they arrived at the rugby field, the coach lined up all the players. Brandon sat horrified as his coach told them that Marna and Sharnelle had died of what they were saying were unnatural causes. But that was it. No explanation, no details. What did it mean to die unnaturally? Brandon felt not only sick to his stomach but heartbroken. Tonight was the night he was going to ask Sharnelle to be his girlfriend. He had been waiting over a year for that moment, and now it was ripped away from him. Brandon didn't know the allegations that the girls had taken their own lives. He thought it was just unnatural causes, like something happened to them. If he did hear it was self-inflicted, he didn't believe it for a moment. He had been hanging out with the girls 6 hours before this. To him, unnatural meant it was murder. Brandon called Ronnie and told him that he suspected Xander right away. At 11:30 the night before, Brandon had gone to Sharnelle and Marna's bedroom. He told her dad they held hands, danced to music, and Sharnelle even was helping him get rid of some acne on his back. Brandon was having a great time, but Sharnelle's phone kept ringing and getting text alerts. It was blowing up non-stop. So he asked her who was messaging, and Sharnelle said it was Xander. They tried their best to ignore it, but the phone calls were distracting. At midnight, Sharnelle finally answered, putting the phone on speaker. Marna and Brandon went completely silent, just listening. Xander's first words were, "Are you alone?" Sharnelle said yes. Xander said he didn't believe her and asked her to walk into a different room. So Sharnelle walked out of the bedroom and right back in, making sure her footsteps were as loud as possible so Xander would think she was by herself. Then Xander asked if she wanted to go out for a late-night meal, and Sharnelle said no. Xander asked if he could return some of her clothes, and again, Sharnelle said no. She would just send Ronnie to pick up her clothes from Monty's farm. But Xander said he was going to be busy for the rest of the week and wasn't sure when he would see Sharnelle again, so he invited himself over to the hostel, asking if the gate was open. Brandon described the scared look on Sharnelle's face when she realized the gate was open. She said the gate was locked and told Xander not to come over, but Xander would not take no for an answer. He said he would break open the gate if he had to. Sharnelle told Xander that if he was so insistent on bringing the clothes, Marna could actually go meet him downstairs at the window. Then Xander called her a name, and right before he hung up, he said, "You're gonna be sorry when you see what I do tonight." Those words scared Sharnelle. She actually started to cry. Brandon knew that when Xander had been in a relationship with Sharnelle, he had threatened to take his own life if she ever left him. He'd done this to manipulate her into staying with him, and now they figured he was threatening to hurt himself again. Brandon offered to stay over in Sharnelle's room and take the backlash or punishment from the hostel mom. He also suggested they wake up the hostel mom and lock the front gate, but Sharnelle told him not to worry. If Xander showed up, she would just stay in her room and ignore him. At that point, Marna, Brandon, and Sharnelle were all scared but tired. They had to get up in just a few hours, so Brandon reluctantly left. Sharnelle insisted everything was going to be okay and told him everything would be fine. Brandon told all of this to Sharnelle's dad, Ronnie, over the phone. Ronnie was overwhelmed with emotion and thanked Brandon for reaching out. Ronnie knew Sharnelle liked Brandon and also knew that Sharnelle had been in a toxic relationship with Xander. But Brandon had been the last person to see both Marna and Sharnelle alive, so Ronnie wondered if Brandon was lying about Xander's phone call to maybe remove a target from his back. Was Xander really capable of murder? Ronnie wasn't sure what to believe. Meanwhile, the forensic investigators showed up at the scene and began gathering evidence. They collected the clump of dark hair that was lying on the ground, as well as Sharnelle and Marna's phones. They swabbed the staircase rails, the bathroom sinks, the front door to the hostel, the girls' phones, and surfaces throughout their bedrooms. They analyzed the rope and the handbag strap. It was anyone's guess as to what happened here. Had Sharnelle and Marna let someone in, and that person ended up harming them? Or did they have a pact to end their own lives? Captain Marcus Ferreira was assigned to the case, representing the South African police. He learned from talking to Christelle that the gates to the boys' and girls' hostels were both left open overnight. If this wasn't a pact, then this was a double homicide. It could have been anyone, a rugby player, a random stranger, or someone in the girls' inner circle. Stella High School knew that the gates had been opened, which could mean they could be sued by Marna and Sharnelle's families for negligence. So, the headmaster, Hobson, panicked and decided to call a private investigation firm in Hartswater. PI Christopher Saunders was assigned to the case. He was hired to find out what happened and to serve justice, but at the end of the day he was working for the headmaster and was going to do everything possible to prove Stella was not responsible for these deaths. The families were still outside the hostel, speculating about what had happened. All of them thought this was murder. When Ronnie got the phone call from Brandon, he repeated Brandon's story to the group. He told them what Xander had said, that they would be sorry when they saw what he did that night. Stephanus heard this and recalled a conversation he had with Marna in March of that year. Marna had told him that Xander was stalking Sharnelle, even though they had broken up. He no longer went to Stella, but he would show up there, and Marna always came to Sharnelle's defense. She even texted Xander that if he didn't leave her best friend alone, she would tell her parents about Xander's behavior and take all this information to the police. That's when Xander went off on Marna. He texted her insulting messages, left vulgar comments, and even referenced her genitals, which was inappropriate. He said Marna had too much control over Sharnelle's life and that she was the one who convinced Sharnelle to break up with him. He told Marna to stop messing with his relationship with Sharnelle or else. Marna showed Stephanus the text message chain, and Stephanus didn't like that Xander was threatening his daughter and calling her names. Though at this time he considered it just teenage drama, Marna said she was scared, so Stephanus decided to handle it himself. He called Xander and politely told him not to call his daughter names. Stephanus had met Xander several times, and the teen was always respectful. But this time Xander got angry with him. He cursed at Stephanus and yelled, "You can't tell me what to do." Xander even told him that if they didn't leave him alone, he would resolve this issue with his gun. Stephanus couldn't take him seriously. Using a gun over a breakup? When the call ended, he recommended 3 things: that Marna, Brandon, and Sharnelle should keep telling Xander no until he got the message and left her alone. And third, he said to let sleeping dogs lie. I think most of us know what he meant. Just try to ignore him. Don't fuel his fire. I don't like to judge people's advice to their children. After all, I don't think Stephanus thought this would truly escalate. Hindsight is always 20/20ths, and I'm guessing he hadn't been in this situation before. But now, standing outside the hostel, all Stephanus could think about was that conversation. Maybe Xander had followed through with his threat. Stephanus took the family car and headed in the direction of Xander's father's farm, with the full intent to confront and even shoot Xander if he had to. Since Xander had graduated, he had been living and working for his dad, so Stephanus knew where to find him. 10 minutes after Stephanus left, private investigator Chris Saunders arrived. He was given a full tour of the crime scene. Marna and Sharnelle had been taken to the hospital by now, but he was given a rundown on how they had been found. Then he interviewed Ronnie, Sanja, Rehan, and Rihanna. Detective Saunders learned about the strange text messages that Ronnie and Sanja had received earlier that morning, one of them mentioning Brandon by name. He also learned that nobody thought this was self-harm. Everyone thought the perpetrator was Xander. But everyone confirmed that Brandon had been the last person to see Marna and Sharnelle, which made him a person of interest. The only person missing was Stephanus, and all of them said he was going after Xander and had brought a gun. Rihanna was convinced that he was going to do something he would regret, so time was of the essence. Saunders took off for the farm, and when he got there, he turned on a voice recorder. As a private investigator, Saunders always did his best to collect as much evidence as possible. He wanted to document the day, remember his suspects and their alibis, but he never used these recordings as evidence in court. When Saunders pulled up outside the farmhouse, Stefanos and Monty were 30 minutes into a screaming match, and Xander was in a slumped position near the wall. Stefanos was brandishing his gun at both men, accusing Xander of murdering his daughter and her best friend. Now Saunders had to do his best to de-escalate the situation. He said he was law enforcement and not there to accuse Xander of murder. Instead, he wanted to make sure that Xander was safe. If the town of Stella thought Xander was responsible, he would be in danger. The police wanted to keep him safe and needed Xander's statement. Stefanos calmed down. He agreed that having Xander under the supervision of law enforcement was the right move, so he left. Xander agreed to go with Saunders into the police car, but he was walking slowly and seemed to be under the influence of something. Saunders asked Monty if it was normal for his son to be sleepy and slurring his words, and Monty said Xander was in shock. He asked if he could drive Xander to the station himself, but Saunders insisted that he drive him, and Monty understood that Saunders was only doing his job. Saunders promised to keep Xander safe. Then Monty said something concerning. He said he didn't have an alibi for Xander. He had seen his son leave at 6:30 p.m. on Friday night and come back to his farm at 6 o'clock Saturday morning, though he might have been at his mom's the whole night, so considering he didn't think he had an alibi, Monty asked if he should hire a lawyer. Saunders said yes. I've said this many times, but it's always smart to hire a lawyer, even if you're innocent. Xander sat in the back seat, and Detective Saunders began the long drive back to Stella while Monty followed behind in his car. Saunders asked Xander why he seemed intoxicated, and Xander just responded that he was stressed. He said Sharnelle's cousin Lamari called him at 7 o'clock in the morning and told him that Sharnelle and Marna had taken their own lives. Sharnelle had been the love of Xander's life, and Marna was his second cousin. He said he was just grieving. Saunders began using the Reed technique of interrogation. That's a 3-step process, where the officer presents all the facts of the case, gives a psychological theory on why a perpetrator might have done this, and then the person being interviewed starts to open up and share. They present alternative questions. For example, the officer might ask, "Did you plan to kill the person? Or did it just happen in the heat of the moment?" I'm sure you've heard of this method from shows or real interviews. These kinds of questions imply guilt. In either case, the answer will produce a confession. The Reed method, when used on younger people, though, can result in false confessions, and I want you to keep that in mind as I relay this conversation. So Detective Saunders asked Xander to provide his alibi. Xander said that on Friday night he was bored. His closest friend worked abroad in the US, so Xander felt isolated. He visited another friend named Petey, and they drank together with some of Petey's Stella friends until about 10:15 that night. After Xander left Petey, he went to a convenience store known as a garage in South Africa to get some more beer. Xander's usual night routine was to go out to the remote fields where they were holding the BSFS, the county fair, and hang out alone, drinking and smoking. Xander said he stayed there until 3 o'clock in the morning. Then he drove to his mom's farm. His mom, Mirsa, was an administrative assistant for Camille Fontaine Farm in Freiburg. She coordinated a transportation business where trucks would come and go with animal feed. Xander drove to that gate, but it was locked. Xander said he knew that trucks came and went regularly, so he just waited a few hours, smoked outside the gate until it opened at 4 o'clock in the morning. He saw a Volvo truck come through the gate and took that opportunity to drive inside. He denied being anywhere near Stella High School that night and said the Volvo was his alibi. Xander was silent and then told Saunders that when Stefanos chewed him out, Stefanos mentioned a video of the crime scene. This is actually standard policy for investigators, to take a video documenting everything at the scene the way they found it. Xander said by bringing up this video, Stephanus was implying that the girls did not die by self-inflicted wounds and that Xander was a murderer. Saunders agreed there was a video, and that's when Xander asked if he could see it. Saunders let him know it was illegal for him to show Xander that video. But why would Xander want to see a crime scene where his ex-girlfriend and his second cousin had died? It's kind of morbid, but maybe he thought he could offer an opinion since the investigator was asking him what he thought. Like, if a killer had done this, why do you think they would do it? Or how do you think this occurred? That's part of the read technique. Saunders told Xander to be honest with him. Did he really not go to the hostel that night? Xander said he didn't know. He claimed he wasn't sure what happened because there had been a few hours between drinking in the empty field and going to his mom's that were unaccounted for. Saunders asked, "Do you not remember or do you not want to remember?" At this point, Xander started to fall asleep. Saunders told him to stay awake. This was important. That's when Xander switched his story. Now he said he had gone to Stella High School that night. He went to the girls' hostel to fix things with Sharnelle. He wasn't sure what time it was since he'd been drinking and didn't look, but we know that Brandon left in the early morning hours around 1 a.m., so it had to have been sometime afterward, maybe around 1:30 or 2 o'clock. Xander said that Sharnelle came out of her room to meet him and smoke. They sat on the staircase and started talking. That's when Sharnelle confessed to him that she was dating Brandon, but was still in love with Xander. Xander told Saunders that he asked her why she couldn't just be with him. She said that everyone in her life thought he was toxic and that the relationship wasn't good. She couldn't convince her friends or her family that they should be together. Xander said he was, of course, upset. He thought that Marna and Sharnelle's parents were standing in the way of their love. It was like Romeo and Juliet. Xander trailed off, and Saunders explained to him exactly how the girls had died. He said that Sharnelle was hanged with a green nylon rope and that Marna had the strap of a handbag around her neck. Saunders asked, "Did you hang Sharnelle?" Xander said no. Saunders asked, "Did you strangle Marna in the bathroom?" Xander again said no. He claimed to have left as soon as Sharnelle told him she was dating Brandon. Now we get to the accusatory interview tactics. Saunders told Xander he would need a good lawyer and urged him to tell the truth. Xander asked Saunders, "What would I need to say in order to get shot?" What I think he meant by this is, what do I have to say in order to be guilty so I could get this over with and they would just take care of me? Saunders said even if Xander confessed, he wouldn't be shot. He'd be safe. But Xander actually asked to be shot. Remember, he was grieving. He had just lost someone he was obsessed with. But was this more of him knowing more than he was letting on? Xander changed his story again. He said that between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., he was intoxicated and everything felt like a dream. He said he had a conversation with Sharnelle on the hostel stairs, and during that conversation, she got cold and went to get long pants from her bedroom. That's when Marna walked to the bathroom. Xander admitted he was mad at Marna. He felt she was the one standing between him and Sharnelle, convincing Sharnelle to date Brandon and not him. He said he noticed a handbag in the alcove, grabbed it, and followed Marna into the girls' bathroom. He said he saw Marna washing her hands in the sink, and that's when Xander admitted he punched her and grabbed her hair. Then he wrapped one of the handles of the bag around her throat and took her life. He then attached the strap to the sink to make it look like Marna had done this to herself. Wow, there are a lot of things he said in there that he wouldn't have known if he wasn't there. The hair being pulled, remember there was a clump of hair on the ground. The way that she was found, nobody told him that. Then he said he met Sharnelle on the stairs, and at that point she thought Marna was still in the bathroom. Xander said they again talked about Brandon, but Sharnelle refused to get back together with Xander. So that's when he punched Sharnelle in the chest, knocking the wind out of her, and then he strangled her by wrapping his arm around her neck. When she was unconscious, he tied a rope around her neck, dragged her to the railing, and with the rope he lowered her over the banister until she was hanging with her feet above the bikes. Xander said brutally, "And then I hanged her." Just like that. It was unbelievable. Xander went on to explain that Sharnelle wanted this. Well, that's what he said. He said that she told him that she'd accidentally sent her daddy a text that was intended to go to Brandon, and it was a photo of her just wearing a bra. Xander told Sharnelle that's why she shouldn't take pictures like that. It was shameful. Xander told Saunders that Sharnelle was embarrassed and ashamed, and now that she couldn't be with Xander, he said that she was too upset to stay on this earth. Saunders asked if Sharnelle wanted to die, and Xander said, yeah, she wanted me to kill her. So Saunders asked if that's why Sharnelle didn't scream to alert the hostel mom, and Saunders said yes. But remember, this is a theory, a technique, where he's kind of eliciting this confession, right? He's asking these leading questions, and Xander just gets to say yes or no. So he's just following the line of reasoning right here. Saunders then asked if Xander had gone through Sharnelle's phone that night and sent any messages, and Xander said no. That was what I was originally thinking. Maybe she accidentally sent it and he saw it. But it seemed more likely that this was sent by the perpetrator because it seemed so odd. But okay, there are a lot of inconsistencies in this story. First of all, Xander implies that Sharnelle didn't scream because she wanted to die, not because he had just punched her and knocked the wind out of her. Also, why was Marna's clump of hair outside the bathroom and not in the bathroom? Did Xander confront her outside and then bring her inside? How fast could he have done that for Sharnelle not to notice? Was Xander lying when he said he hadn't gone through her messages? After all, he had demanded her phone multiple times while they were dating. And if Xander really wanted to be shot for his actions, why didn't he just let Stephanus take care of it? South Africa doesn't have the death penalty, so there was no way for Xander to end his life. Xander sounded like he knew everything about the crime, but Saunders had just told him everything as well because he was asking questions, and all Xander had to do was say yes. Xander had also received a phone call from Lamari at 7 a.m., explaining how the girls had been found, and Stephanus had revealed a bunch of information when he was threatening him. Was Xander just making this up? And why would he do that if it wasn't him who killed them? Detective Saunders pulled into the Stella police station, glad that he'd recorded every minute of this conversation without Xander knowing. It wasn't an official interview, but it was a good starting point for the investigation, for sure. At this point, Saunders dropped Xander off with other officers who brought him in for an official confession. His dad, Monty, and his mom, Mara, waited at the police station. Police asked Xander if he wanted to speak to a lawyer, and he said no. He was happy to just do the confession. So now, on Saturday, May 26th, Xander confessed. He said, Sharnelle told me that she no longer wanted to be on Earth and that she did not want to hurt other people. I then realized that she was asking me to help her take her life. We made an agreement that I had to find a way so that she didn't have to feel the pain. I put my arm around her throat to make her pass out. With the rope already around her neck, I just want to state that I tied the rope to the stairs when she was still alive, and she was aware of it. Then Marna came up the stairs to go to the bathroom. I don't remember if I talked to her. I saw a handbag underneath the stairs. I picked it up and ran after Marna. While she was washing her hands, what I can remember is that I suffocated her. That was his statement. So we changed the story again because, in the story, Marna walked up right past her friend and didn't notice that she was hanging by the banister. He's got to be lying, but it didn't matter. He was arrested on 2 charges of first-degree murder and taken to the Roy Krum prison in Mafeking. The investigation was far from over. Detective Saunders started interviewing people close to Xander, including Petey. Petey, now known as Angel, had been present during a domestic fight between his parents in which his mother had actually died, and ever since, Petey was known for his aggression. Saunders was concerned because if this was the kind of person Xander was hanging out with, maybe Petey assisted Xander in the crime. But Petey said that Xander dropped him off at 10:15, and he'd been home the whole night. His cell phone records would prove it. Detective Saunders also interviewed Brandon. He was still a person of interest because he had been the last person to see Sharnelle and Marna alive. Saunders asked Brandon for his phone. He cooperated, and they went through all of his text messages with Sharnelle. Nothing was out of the ordinary. He was an understanding guy. He respected her boundaries and even offered to be there for her on the morning of May 26th. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Brandon and Sharnelle sent their last messages to one another. Brandon asked if Sharnelle was okay and offered to come back over to the girls' hostel. He could be her personal bodyguard against Xander, or Sharnelle could come over to the boys' dorm. Sharnelle said it was a bad idea. They could get in trouble. She insisted she was okay, and according to his phone records, Brandon's phone never left the boys' hostel until 6:30 in the morning. He was probably asleep after that because he had a big game the next day. Saunders heard Brandon's alibi once more, as well as the story he told Ronnie about Xander and Sharnelle's terrifying late-night phone call. Investigators fact-checked this with Sharnelle's phone. On Friday night, Sharnelle texted Brandon to stop by the girls' hostel and have coffee with them. She had about a dozen missed calls from Xander over the course of the night. She picked up one call after midnight, and this matched up with Brandon's story. Brandon also told police that in the months leading up to the crime, Xander would show up at Stella High School, randomly. Sharnelle told Brandon that she didn't want to meet up with Xander. She was tired of saying no, and him not taking no for an answer. Recently, she had told Xander that she was seeing Brandon, and Xander had actually called Brandon, so he kind of already knew this and tried to manipulate him into breaking up with Sharnelle so that he could be with her and just stay away from her. Brandon could see right through Xander's BS. He had liked Sharnelle for so long, and Sharnelle liked him back. He wasn't going to let Xander get in the way of a good thing. In the next few days, Sharnelle and Marna were given autopsies by forensic pathologist Dr. Trom Balls. Marna had several injuries. Some of her hair was pulled out, which is already evident from the clump found at the scene. That alone would suggest this was not self-inflicted. Her jaw was broken. Maybe she had even been punched in the face. As for the cause of death, it was ruled a homicide by strangulation. Marna had been throttled with the strap of a bag. It was not consistent with hanging, meaning Marna had been murdered and the strap had been tied to the tap after she died. Dr. L suggested that Marna was killed before Sharnelle. The bathroom was close enough to the stairs that Marna would have seen Sharnelle on her way to the bathroom. If Sharnelle was already dead and hanging from the banister, it was clear that there was a scuffle outside of the bathroom, which is why officers found some of Marna's hair there. Knowing Marna, she would have put up a fight, which it appeared she had. As for Sharnelle, Dr. L said she sustained blunt force trauma to her chest. The attacker hit her and used this opportunity to overpower her. Sharnelle had 2 strangulation wounds. The first was horizontal from something wider than a rope about the size of a forearm. The second was from the rope. This part is graphic, but it's the truth. The rope marks bruised her neck in multiple places. This meant that Sharnelle had been awake or woke up while she was hanging from the rope. She would have struggled at that point, and the other wounds show that she had tried to get herself down while the rope was cutting off her airway. For example, all of the fingernails on her right hand were broken, and most of the fingernails on her left as well. This was from trying to pry the rope from her neck. She had scratched her neck until it bled. How horrifying. There was also an injury to her nose and pressure to her head, which caused bleeding behind her eyes. I am horrified that this happened to her. Who knows how long she was hanging there, just scared and alone in her last moments. Both of their bodies were swabbed in order to find possible DNA from the perpetrator. When Detective Saunders heard the report, everything lined up. Xander could not have known Marna was punched in the face and Sharnelle was punched in the chest unless he was there. They had their killer behind bars. Now they needed to collect enough evidence to prevent him from ever being released. Police canvassed the neighborhood and put out a call for tips. A witness then came forward and claimed that they had seen Xander's car near the girls' hostel on Friday night. Police confirmed that no other girls, other than Marna and Sharnelle, were present at the hostel. At that point, the schoolgirls were given the opportunity to speak with counselors, but that didn't help the fact that their friends were gone. Can you imagine walking up and down those stairs and using that bathroom knowing what happened there? Then, They did put on a memorial at the school. I do have some photos of posters they put up, photos of both of the girls, and they were there to honor their memories. Meanwhile, analysts looked at the texts from Sharnelle's phone. From her parents, they knew that Sharnelle and Marna had been killed between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., and these text messages were sent at 4:17. They were from the perpetrator. So the police department looked into Xander's Volvo alibi. If Xander was home at 4 a.m., like he said, then they had arrested the wrong guy. They went to Masha's farm and located the exact Volvo truck that Xander was talking about. It was company policy to install tracking devices inside all their vehicles to record the mileage and assess business costs. Officer F found out that the Volvo was turned on at 4:02 a.m. driver. He was on his way to Freiburg by 4:30. Masha's farm was 40 minutes away from Stella, so if a fake text was sent at 4:17 by Xander, then he would have gotten back from the hostel at 5 a.m. If he was at Stella, how did he know the Volvo was leaving at 4? Did he pass it on the way to his mom's, or did he contact his mom and she created an alibi for him? Or maybe he was home the whole time. It seemed unlikely, but anything was possible. So police dug into Xander's personal life. Xander was born on May 13, 1999, to Masha and Monty BMA in Hartswater, a part of the Northern Cape. Masha spent years trying to have a child. She miscarried several times, and during Xander's pregnancy she actually contracted German measles, also called rubella. Doctors recommended that Masha terminate this pregnancy, but this was her miracle baby. She couldn't give him up. When Xander was born, he was small and sickly, but he ended up making a full recovery. Masha thought he was a gift from God and she would do anything for him. Xander was a mama's boy, and everyone knew it. When Xander's parents divorced, it was very hard for him to cope. He was a troublemaker. He acted out in school, so they took him to a mental health professional to talk about his feelings. Xander wouldn't talk. His behavioral issues got worse with age. He bullied his classmates and was suspended multiple times while at Stella for getting into fights, hiding alcohol, and even sneaking into the girls' hostel. He graduated a year late because of his suspensions. Rumors swirled around Stella that Xander was bad news and his parents should have disciplined him better. I'm not sure that you can blame Monty and Masha, but you tell me, how do you feel about that? Here in the US, we've recently seen a mother of a school shooter being found guilty of manslaughter for not doing her part to keep her son from committing such a heinous crime. So weigh in with your thoughts in the comments. I'm torn because we can't always control someone else's actions, and at this point, Xander was an adult. However, nature and nurture do play a part. As a 19-year-old, Xander was paid by local farmers to hunt and kill wild animals like jackals that killed their cattle. Xander loved to hunt. He loved guns. This was small-town Northwest. It was the culture there. But he'd killed before. Had he graduated to humans? Now that was the question. Investigators talked to the families. Sharnelle's parents, Ronnie and Anna, said they were concerned about Xander from the start. He seemed like a nice, quiet boy, but he had been suspended, and they heard he was quite the player. So they warned Sharnelle not to date him, but Sharnelle always gave people a chance. Stefanis told police that Marna had told him Sharnelle and Xander were in an abusive relationship. Her words were that Xander wouldn't let Sharnelle post pictures on Instagram. He thought some of the things she wore were too attractive, and he would even delete certain photos from her phone. He didn't even want her to wear makeup. She had to quit sports, and he tried to feed her sweets so that she would gain weight because, in his mind, he thought it would make her less attractive. If her self-esteem decreased, she would rely on him more, and he'd have more power. Things escalated. People at school saw Xander grab Sharnelle's arm, push her, and even cause bruising. Sharnelle told Marna that Xander was aggressive and scary. She waited until the winter of 2018 to break up with him because she was waiting for Xander to graduate so that she didn't have to see him every day. People close to Sharnelle said that she didn't think Xander was capable of anything drastic like murder, but she knew he was capable of violence, and she didn't want him to have any more power over her life. Investigators waited for DNA results to come back. In June of 2018, a joint funeral service was held at a Dutch Reformed church in Freiburg. Hundreds of people showed up to celebrate Marna and Sharnelle's friendship and their memory. The girls were buried near each other, and blue, pink, and purple balloons were released into the sky. This tradition represents letting go of grief, letting their souls ascend to the heavens, and letting their spirits be free. Ron told reporters that Sharnelle was his sunbeam. She was his reason to live. Now that she was gone, his life had lost meaning. He hoped that he could meet her in heaven one day. He didn't want May 25th to be the last time he heard Sharnelle laugh. I feel so bad for parents who lose their children. At the funeral, the common theory swirling around was that Xander had snuck into the girls' room while they slept, knocked them both out, and then ended their lives. But the autopsy results said something different. Everyone hoped that the girls hadn't seen it coming, but if only they knew the truth. Laurie Mari said she thought it was murder from the beginning. She remembered Xander's obsession with Sharnelle and thought Xander was the murderer. But why then would Laurie call Xander at 7 o'clock that morning, the morning of her cousin's death? Was she accusing him, or was she informing him? We'll never know what happened during that call, but we do know that the family thought Xander did it. But unbelievably, the general public did not remember. Detective Saunders had not released Xander's original confession. There was just the police statement, which provided only circumstantial evidence but no concrete evidence. Nothing tied him to the crime scene. Then the DNA results came back and they were inconclusive. And I swear when they need the DNA results the most, they always do. But they're inconclusive. There's no other evidence tying him. So they needed it so badly. Xander was not ruled out as a suspect, though he was also not incriminated. The crime scene was covered in DNA. There were so many people who went back and forth in the school. Several samples were found on the rope, the purse, the stairwell, and their bedroom. Everything had been touched by the girls who lived at that facility. There was so much evidence that it was impossible to isolate one DNA strand from the rest. They determined that the strap used to hurt Marna had not been touched by anyone in her family, and the rope used to hurt Sharnelle had been touched by paramedics and her uncle Louis. Sharnelle's body had been touched by her dad Ronnie, and as we know, this could have disturbed or covered some of the DNA evidence. Analysts also checked Sharnelle's fingernails and found her own DNA, as well as DNA they assumed might have belonged to Brandon. She had been touching Brandon's back earlier. If you'll recall, she was helping get rid of some of his back knee. It was highly unlikely that she scratched the person who killed her, since she was taken by surprise. Xander's DNA was the only DNA that was tested against all of the crime scene swabs. Ronnie, Louis, and Brandon were all close enough to Sharnelle to be of interest, but their DNA would have already been on scene. They didn't have a motive, so they were not suspects. But now the investigators were back at square one, only relying on Xander's confession, which he had taken back. Xander had actually gotten a lawyer, Faye Farion, and he told Farion that he was not anywhere near Stella on Friday night or Saturday morning. However, he claimed he had been threatened by both Chris Saunders and Stefanos, who would kill his parents if he didn't confess to both murders. That was his argument. His lawyer asked why a witness had seen Xander's car near the hostel that night, and Xander again changed his story, a common theme here. He said he had gone to visit Sharnelle briefly but hadn't even gotten out of his car. He was just dropping off some of her clothes. Xander promised they wouldn't find any of his fingerprints or DNA at the crime scene, so his lawyer gave Xander the benefit of the doubt. But what was unfortunate was that Xander kept telling different stories. He signed Xander up for a mental health assessment. At Xander's next hearing with the Freiburg Magistrates Court, he and his defense decided to plead not guilty to both murders, meaning he would have to be indicted and go to trial. Xander took back his original police confession for several reasons. First, when Laurie Mari called Xander and said Sharnelle and Marna were dead, he took a handful of anti-anxiety medication. He didn't specify how many pills, but he did say about 10 times his normal dose. Was he trying to cope with his grief? Was he anxious because he had murdered Sharnelle? Or was he trying to end his own life? Was this even true? We do know he was acting intoxicated when Stephanus arrived at Monty's farm. He said that Xander looked intoxicated when he showed up. He asked why Xander looked intoxicated. So now what his defense was saying is that Saunders took advantage of Xander's vulnerable state and questioned him the entire drive to the station. The second reason Xander took back his confession is that he said it was a false confession. He claimed Saunders intimidated him on the car ride over, and the questioning went on and on. The only way to make it stop was to confess. So, in his drug-induced state of mind, Xander said he didn't see any way out, so that's when he confessed and told Saunders exactly what he wanted him to say. Xander accused Saunders of a crime. Judge Ronald Hendricks hadn't known any of this, so he asked Chris Saunders if he had used any threatening tactics to force Xander to make a confession. This resulted in a trial against Saunders, but luckily Saunders had recorded the entire conversation, so Xander dug his own grave. Detective Saunders had never intended to show the judge or anyone the original conversation between him and Xander, but now that Xander falsely accused him, the recording could be used against him. So now, at Saunders' trial, Colonel Coughlin and Colonel Longa, the two cops who had taken Xander's confession at the station, testified that Xander confessed after talking to Saunders and waived his right to an attorney. Saunders' defense showed the judge the audio recording of their conversation, and that's when the judge noticed that the private investigator was using the Reed technique of interrogation, which wasn't the wisest method. In the recording, you can hear Saunders ask Xander repeatedly whether he's on drugs, and Xander repeatedly said he was just in shock. In the recording, Xander talks about hitting Marna and Sharnelle to catch them off guard. The judge knew there was no way Xander could have known the autopsy results before they came back. Judge Hendricks decided to exonerate Chris Saunders, and this was evidence that Xander knew much more than he should have. In preparation for Xander's trial, the prosecution put together a timeline. The last time Brandon and Sharnelle texted was around 1 a.m., and in Xander's confession, he said he showed up at 2 a.m. and he and Sharnelle talked. We don't know how long they talked, but we do know that Sharnelle sent a message at 3:42 a.m. to Ronnie, and 2 messages at 4:17 a.m. that said she was sorry. Xander still claimed he didn't send these text messages. If he did, it would imply these murders were not a crime of passion. If he wanted to stay out of jail, he couldn't admit any attempts to cover up his crime, but it was obvious some, if not all, of these texts were sent by the perpetrator. There are 2 scenarios, and I'm going to let you decide which one you think happened. The first scenario is that Xander and Sharnelle talked on the stairs, and Xander demanded to know her phone password. At 3:40, Xander was going through her phone in front of her and found that picture that, in his mind, he thought was disgusting. He decided to send it to her dad. Sharnelle was upset, so she went upstairs to change, which gave Xander 30 minutes to murder both Marna and Sharnelle. Then, at 4:17, he sent 2 fake text messages implying the friends had taken their own lives. He was back at his mom's farm at 5 o'clock in the morning, and he might have seen the Volvo on his way home. The other scenario is that Xander had the conversation, killed Marna and then Sharnelle, and spent half an hour between 3:40 and 4:17 a.m. going through Sharnelle's phone. Prosecutors assumed the second scenario was the most accurate timeline. Xander could have gotten Sharnelle's password before he killed her, or already known it. The picture of Sharnelle in her bra didn't seem like an accident. He had a motive to send Ronnie that picture. It was to shame her. Xander told Saunders during their initial conversation that he didn't like when Sharnelle took pictures of herself. If he wanted to ruin Sharnelle's image in her dad's mind, it would make sense that he sent it after she died. In most cases, a father is not going to look at this innocent selfie and be ashamed of their child, but in Xander's twisted mind, it was shameful for women to flaunt their beauty and their bodies. Maybe he wanted to tarnish her memory, implicate Brandon in the crime, or create an excuse for why Sharnelle had taken her own life because she was embarrassed. In any case, Xander killed Sharnelle and Marna between the hours of 2 o'clock and 4:20 a.m., and if the second scenario was true, Xander sent all of the messages. It shows he was arrogant, and this wasn't a crime of passion. He spent 30 whole minutes sitting in the middle of a crime scene, scrolling to find every last secret. As for Marna, she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was loyal and stuck up for her best friend, Sharnelle, no matter what, and Xander thought that was worth murder. Xander's lawyers quit due to a conflict of interest, and Xander got a new lawyer named Muman Vessels. While Xander was waiting for his trial, he was allegedly jumped in prison, so he applied for a bail hearing. And you're going to want to hear this. The prosecution came out fighting. They brought forward a letter that Xander had written to his mom while he was in jail. In that letter, he asked his mother to find 2 judges that she thought were corrupt enough that they could pay them off and make sure his bail application would go through. He said if she didn't help him get out of jail, he would take his own life. Wow, talk about emotional manipulation with your own mother. We know he did this with Sharnelle as well, threatening to hurt himself. Xander confessed that if he got out of jail with the help of his mother, he would escape to Botswana and stay there for 5 years until no one was looking for him anymore. Then he wrote, "I wish that for once you would just read my letter and do exactly as I say. Just be a mother for once in your life and help me." Xander sent that letter not knowing that letters sent from jail are public record. Everyone has access. I've run into a lot of cases where criminals don't know this. Now you know, nothing in jail is private, no conversations, phone calls, letters, nothing. At the hearing, a psychiatrist testified that Xander had paranoid personality disorder. He was depressive, reclusive, impulsive, angry, and thought everyone was out to get him. He also believed his existence in the world was much more significant than other people's. He wasn't able to understand people's motives, so he assumed that everyone was stupid and hated him. He relied on manipulation to get what he wanted. This was consistent with what people knew about Xander. He once posted on his WhatsApp status, "You can't trust anyone." I'm sure you know what WhatsApp is. It's run by Facebook, now Meta. It's the most commonly used messaging platform in Europe and parts of Africa, and you can update your status on the app, just like you would on Facebook. Several acquaintances suspected that he was a narcissist, but I think most of us have said, "You can't trust anyone," at some point in our lives. Of course, Xander came to his own defense, and his lawyer decided to quit. He wouldn't say why, but this was only the beginning of Xander's defense attorney journey. He went through them like candy. His dad spent so much money on lawyers for Xander that he had to sell their family farm. I don't always understand people's urge to defend their children at all costs when their children have clearly done something wrong. After the failed bail hearing, Xander said he didn't want bail. He realized that if he was released into the real world, he'd be a danger. People were starting to suspect him. Remember, the public had been on his side, and at this point he was even scared for his own life because who knows, maybe Stefanos would come back and finish the job. Marna and Sharnelle's family waited over a year for Xander's trial to start. It was held in Matu High Court, and Mafeking State Prosecutor Johan Smith told the story of Xander, a jealous ex-boyfriend who confessed to the murders in front of Detective Saunders and then to the South African police, but took back his statement when he realized he was facing life in prison. Prosecutor Smith came forward with more evidence against Xander. Marcus Fear had studied Xander's phone records, and at 3:26 a.m. Saturday morning, guess where he was? The GPS put him at the high school. They couldn't pinpoint him exactly at Stella, but he was in the area. There aren't that many phone towers in rural South Africa. Xander had not been at the field drinking, and at 5:01 a.m., his phone finally pinged on Camille Fontaine Farm. If he had sent that last text at 4:17, he could have easily left and gotten back to his mom's house if he had sped down the road. Xander's new attorney, Neon Rai, said Detective Saunders had intimidated and fed Xander information for a confession. Xander testified on his own behalf. He told one of his stories about the conversation on the stairs where Sharnelle left to put on long pants, and he left as soon as he realized she was serious with Brandon. However, Prosecutor Smith pointed out that Detective Saunders wouldn't have told Xander that Sharnelle was wearing long pants. It was a very specific detail to bring up if you hadn't seen the crime scene or been there. Xander continued his testimony, saying that Saunders took advantage of him in the car and Xander just gave the answers Saunders was looking for. Then Saunders sat down with the other police and interrogated Xander for hours. Xander said he was nauseous, tired, drunk, and stressed. After hours in an interrogation room, he confessed to what they wanted to hear. While the prosecution brought in the officers who had interviewed Xander, Colonel Coughlin and Colonel Longa, they both said that Chris Saunders wasn't there for Xander's statement. The trial ground to a halt. Nian Rai considered himself Xander's friend, but Xander had lied to him. Due to conflicting interests, this attorney quit as well, and the trial was postponed until May of 2019. At this point, the trial was international news. People didn't understand why it had been postponed. The public was still not on Chris Saunders' side, but they didn't know that he had taped the conversation with Xander. However, the judge knew that, and this is why the court of public opinion can be dangerous. That's why waiting until trial is always best, so all the facts come out. Xander didn't know the judge knew about this recorded confession. At this point, the judge knew Xander was lying. The prosecution just had to provide enough clear evidence of guilt. Additionally, most people thought that Chris Saunders was hired by the family's private investigator. Remember, he was hired by the school initially, and the public thought the families were biased. They didn't like Xander, so it seemed obvious that Saunders was just doing everything to point the finger at an innocent teenager. The public also thought that Saunders was being paid by Stella High School, so his job was to make sure the perpetrator knew Sharnelle and Marna, so that the school wouldn't get sued for leaving the gates open. Even if the gates had been shut, Sharnelle and Marna could have let Xander in on their own, or he could have jumped the gate. After all, he had done it before and threatened to do it. This was not the first time he snuck into a girl's hostel. Even if this information was public, law enforcement had tons of circumstantial evidence against him. The actual trial was held in 2019 when Xander was able to finally get another lawyer. The prosecution came forward with their original argument, but this time they included the recorded evidence of Xander's conversation with Saunders in the car. The judge had already heard it. Remember, the reason this was coming in at all was because Xander was the one who accused Saunders of making him confess. Xander did this to himself, and that confession was very convincing. The new defense attorney, Conrad Bester and Saki Nell, said that Xander's other attorneys had resigned because of personal problems, not because Xander had lied to them. They pointed the finger at Brandon. He'd been present on Friday night, and no one had treated him like a suspect. Xander didn't have any DNA or fingerprints at the crime scene, so he couldn't be responsible. Well, Brandon testified for the prosecution. He explained he had been with Marna and Sharnelle, and that his DNA would be at the crime scene. He loved Sharnelle and testified that Xander used horrible and disrespectful names for women. Anastasia Visser was another prosecution witness. She went to a different high school but played against Sharnelle in sports and knew Xander from a fishing trip. She had both of them on WhatsApp and they would text occasionally. For a long time, Sharnelle complained to her about Xander's obsessive behavior, and Anastasia supported her. Then, Sharnelle broke up with Xander, and Xander vented with Anastasia over the course of months. Xander and Anastasia texted more and more. They were attracted to one another, and I have to wonder if part of Anastasia's appeal was her nickname, Loy, the same name everyone used for Sharnelle. The two had a flirtationship, but they lived far from one another, so it never turned into anything serious. At 6 p.m. on Thursday, May 24th, Anastasia was watching her favorite TV show when her phone rang. It was Xander, yelling over the phone about Sharnelle and Brandon. He told her if he saw Sharnelle again, he wouldn't be able to control his anger, and he vowed to drive Sharnelle so crazy that she would kill herself. Xander also said Sharnelle took risque photos of herself, and he'd bet she was sending them to Brandon. He told Anastasia he wanted to send them to her dad to show Ronnie how shameful his daughter was. Anastasia tried to de-escalate the situation. She said she didn't think Xander was serious about any of it, and hated being caught in the middle of his relationship with Sharnelle. Anastasia didn't tell anyone about this call, Not even Sharnelle, not the police, not her parents. But 2 days later, when she watched the news, Anastasia was overcome with guilt. She told her parents about Xander's call, and her parents convinced her to go to the police. The defense said Anastasia was lying, that she had a history of suspensions at her high school. They said she had called Xander that night and wanted revenge against Xander because they had been in a relationship, and Xander broke up with her because he was still in love with Sharnelle. It was a big love triangle, according to their defense. Anastasia denied all this, and now, the "I love you, Brandon" message sent from Sharnelle's phone to Ronnie made sense. It was an act of defamation against Sharnelle while Xander was venting his anger at her relationship with Brandon. How could Anastasia have known that Xander sent a message from Sharnelle's phone? This also narrowed down the timeline for when Xander had found out about Sharnelle and Brandon. It must have been that week. It gave him a clear motive. Once again, Xander testified on his own behalf. He had a whole new story. What a surprise. He said Sharnelle met him at midnight, literally when she would have been hanging out with Marna and Brandon. He didn't get out of his car, but Sharnelle came through the gate and met him. She sat in his passenger seat and they had a long conversation. According to him, Sharnelle told Xander that she wanted to be with him, but Marna wouldn't let her. Brandon was just a ruse and a distraction for her. Xander said he wanted to be with Sharnelle and leave Brandon in the dust, but Sharnelle said Marna wouldn't approve. She told him to take it up with Marna. He said he left and got home at 4 to see the Volvo truck. Xander said the prosecution really needed to look into Brandon. Xander was innocent, and it must have been the other guy. This was the first time Xander had pointed the finger at Brandon in all of his statements. Why? I have a guess. Xander thought Brandon hadn't heard that conversation with Sharnelle over the phone. Remember how he called her, and Sharnelle said she was alone but pretended to walk out of the room, keeping it on speaker? Xander didn't know that Brandon had heard his threat. He only saw Brandon's concerned text to Sharnelle from 1 o'clock in the morning when he looked through her phone. There's a possibility that Stephanus mentioned Brandon when he came over to threaten Monty and Xander with a gun, but Xander didn't realize Brandon was such a threat to the story until just before the second trial, when he got his 4th set of lawyers. Brandon was the only person that Xander could reasonably pin the murder on, but Xander wasn't as smart as he thought he was. That's a common theme with people like this. They always think they're smarter than everyone else. As for Xander's alibi, the Volvo truck, the defense sent an email to the transportation company that Mara worked for. They asked the truck driver to testify in court. Since the prosecution proved that Xander's phone pinged at 3:50 in Stella, they wanted to know if anyone had seen Xander at 4 at Camille Fontaine Farm. But the truck driver never showed up, and the trucking company never replied. The prosecution asked Xander 2 questions. Did Mara have access to the trucking company email, and did she have access to change the data on each truck? Xander said, I don't know. Had Xander's mom Mara known that Xander was at Stella and sent a truck at 4 Meadow create an alibi, or could she have just changed the time the truck left in the system? Was this truck driver even a real person? Had Xander seen the Volvo, assumed it was his mom's company's truck, and made up a story? If the answer was yes to any of these questions, Mara might have assisted her son in covering up this murder. This was not a surprise. Xander had his mom in his back pocket. She loved her son and would never think anything bad about him. Remember the end-of-the-year prom event when Xander bought Sharnelle a dress? Well, Mara was the one who supported that idea. Xander even told his mom he didn't like when Sharnelle wore makeup because he thought women looked bad with makeup. Mara convinced him that makeup wasn't a bad thing, but she promised to do tasteful makeup on Sharnelle. She never thought that Xander dressing Sharnelle was controlling behavior, but he was manipulating her all along. Makeup might seem like a silly example, but for Xander, it was one domino in a long chain of abuse and control, even if it was micro in nature. Finally, the prosecution asked Xander why he kept changing his story every time he took the stand. He had a new story each time, and Xander said it was the fault of his old lawyers. You know, the ones who quit. He said whatever his lawyers wanted him to say, but he was the one who changed his plea to not guilty. At this point, Xander doesn't have an alibi, he doesn't have a solid story, but what he does have is a ticket to jail. On February 17, 2020, Judge Hendricks said that Xander was a liar and a manipulator. He killed Marna while she was innocently washing her hands, and then targeted Sharnelle. This was premeditated. He wanted to end their lives. The motive was jealousy and anger that Sharnelle had moved on to a new relationship with Brandon, and Marna had supported her. When Xander learned that Sharnelle wasn't under his thumb and would never get back with him, he decided she would never get with anyone else ever again. Even though it was Xander's first criminal offense, he was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, as he should have been. After the verdict, both Marna and Sharnelle's family were exhausted. Ed, Marna's mom, had barely spoken to the media in the 2 years since her daughter's murder, but she held it together. She always said, "Oh, I'm fine." She was stubborn and strong-willed, just like Marna, and she was relieved that there would be justice. But it wasn't over yet. They would have to wait until August for sentencing, because COVID hit and everything got postponed. After the verdict, Monty was outraged. He had spent so much money for his son to be sent to jail. He stormed outside and slapped Marcus Fear, the head investigator, across the face. Wow, maybe we can see where some of the violence and anger issues came from. He slapped him so hard that Officer Fire fell back in his chair. Monty said he would come for Chris Saunders next. In the months following this, Judge Hendrick learned that Xander threatened to resolve this issue with Stephanus and Marna with a gun. I mean, he was going to find out eventually, and the judge was shocked. If his mind wasn't already made up, it was now. I do not think there's a jury involved in these cases, as far as I could tell. South Africa had a lot of non-jury cases. But on August 7th, people flooded into the courtroom. Ronnie and Stephanus sat next to each other, just like they had in every single hearing. Stephanus brought a giant photo of Marna and placed it on the back wall so she could watch over the entire courtroom. Stephanus brought it to remind Xander of what he had taken from the 2 families. Sonia was drained emotionally. She cared more about Sharnelle than anyone else in her life, and now she felt numb to the world. It was like Sharnelle took away the positivity, the bubbly energy with her. Marna's mom was the only one who had not been able to face all of the hearings and court appearances. She was shattered and tired of facing Xander. I get it, none of this would bring her daughter back. The judge gave Xander 2 life sentences. He will also be unfit to possess a gun for the rest of his life. But where and when would he need to possess one? I don't know. Judge Hendricks said in his speech, "There is a huge outcry by society. The gender-based violence which engulfs our society needs to be stopped. The violence perpetrated by men against their women counterparts needs to end. The only way this can be stopped is to impose harsher sentences." 2 life sentences was the harshest sentence he could deliver. Ronnie and Stephanus gasped and threw their hands in the air. It was finally over. Monty and Mara were furious. They hugged onto their son. They were still convinced he never committed this crime. Xander tried to appeal his sentence and failed. He requested new attorneys, which I think is ridiculous. He had his chance. He asked that the truck driver be summoned to testify, which I also think is ridiculous. Do you think the truck driver is his mom? I'm not 100% sure, but the thought crossed my mind. I think there's something fishy about that. He also asked why they never tested Brandon's DNA. But Xander's first 4 defense attorneys didn't request Brandon's DNA. There was not enough evidence for Brandon to ever be a suspect. Sharnelle and Marna had their entire lives ahead of them. They'll never get married, have children, or have careers. Sharnelle will never become a successful photographer, and hundreds of animals will never receive Marna's care. But at least Xander will rot in prison. In 2022, the president of South Africa said that ending gender-based violence is the country's #1 priority. This case and so many others could have ended differently if one man weren't on a power trip and actually respected the word no. Xander didn't love Sharnelle. He wanted power over her, and he couldn't have her, so no one else could. Denise seemed to have it all. She married her high school sweetheart, traveled internationally to share their faith, supported families in need, and began a family of her own. By 2013, Denise was a mother of 3. That morning, the family had celebrated Valentine's Day together, exchanging gifts, but later that day, she never arrived to pick up her daughter from school. On a day meant for love, something dark unfolded. This is her story. Today I'm going to introduce you to Denise Newton. She was born on February 3, 1974, in Miami, Florida, Dade County, to her parents Diane and Douglas Newton. During her childhood, her family moved to Illinois from Florida. Denise and her siblings attended Faith Baptist Christian School in Pekin, Illinois. The school says it strives to provide a solid education and a nurturing and safe environment based on Christ's philosophy. Their graduates possess the knowledge to succeed in college, a desire to serve in their local churches, and a commitment to strong Christian families and education. They graduate as leaders in their community, churches, and workplaces. As a graduate of Faith Baptist School, Denise Newton possessed all of those admirable qualities and more. While Denise was attending Faith Baptist, she met her first crush. His name was Nathan. Nathan and Denise met when Nathan was in 3rd grade and Denise was in 4th. Denise swept Nathan off his feet with her bouncy little curls and her bright personality. For Nathan, Denise was not only the most beautiful girl in the school, but in the whole world. Nathan doubted Denise knew he even existed at the time, but they developed a friendship in junior high school. Denise and Nathan both had crushes on one another up until high school, but since they had conservative religious backgrounds, they weren't allowed to date each other. Neither one of their parents believed in dating, so all they could do was maintain a good friendship. Most of the time, they would just hang out with each other at the youth group or church-related activities. That didn't stop them from being absolutely inseparable, and everyone noticed their connection. They spent every waking moment with one another. Nathan was smitten with Denise, his first and only girlfriend. The couple were popular students during their high school years. Nathan was a star basketball player, and Denise cheered him on from the sidelines. Even the teachers could see that they had this connection between them. Something special. Denise was a year older than Nathan, so she ended up graduating in 1992, and she left Illinois to attend college in Minnesota. It was the first time that the pair was truly apart, but the following year, Nathan graduated from Faith Baptist Christian School, and he followed Denise to Minnesota. Denise and Nathan's engagement 1 year later didn't surprise anyone who knew them. Nathan said he proposed to Denise without a second of hesitation. Growing up, Nathan admired Denise's parents because he thought they had a perfect relationship. In Nathan's mind, Denise's mother, Diane, was the ideal wife and mother. He thought that the marriage she had to Douglas was the epitome of love, and he wanted the same. He spent almost every day at the Newtons' home. It was like a second home to him, and Denise's parents loved him and saw him as one of their own children. When Nathan saw that Denise was a lot like her mother, he knew he wanted to spend forever with her. Denise married Nathan Luthold, her high school sweetheart, on July 15, 1995, in LaSalle, Illinois. Diane was so happy for Denise, so happy. She always loved being a wife and a mother herself, so she was excited that her daughter had finally found true love to experience that with. Before Denise and Nathan exchanged their vows at their wedding ceremony, she actually prepared and sang a song for Nathan about how he was her everything, that everything Denise ever wanted was standing before her in him. She knew that their marriage was going to be everything she dreamed of since she was a little girl. Many women know exactly what they want, down to the colors of flowers, from a very young age. After they got married, the couple made their home in Peoria, Illinois, where Denise began working for a local insurance company, and Nathan took a job in sales. The Lutholds were very active members of their local church, LaMarche Baptist Church in Mapleton, Illinois. Religion and God were at the center of their marriage and their lives. However, Nathan couldn't help but feel like he was meant for something more, especially when it came to his spiritual calling. It had been Nathan's dream to participate in missions abroad for the Baptist Church for many years, and he finally shared this dream with Denise. Of course, she felt like it was God's will and that they would find a way. In 1998, the Leuthold family was given the opportunity to take part in a mission trip to Lithuania. Another young couple from their church had started their own missionary work and were taking trips to Lithuania to share the gospel. Nathan saw this as his chance to make his dream come true, so he asked the couple running the missions trip if he and Denise could assist them. Of course, they wanted more people to help, so they agreed, but it wouldn't happen overnight. It cost money. It was an investment to move. So, Denise and Nathan decided to ask her parents if they could come live with them for about 6 months to save money, and they said yes. The two of them sold all their possessions and moved into the Newtons' home at 700 West Mossville Road, Peoria, Illinois. While they were there, they worked hard and studied everything they could about Lithuania, including learning the language. Neither Denise nor Nathan was familiar with the country at the time. Of the 3 Baltic states, Lithuania has the largest population and the largest area. In 2015, Lithuania had a population of about 2 million people. Although it has a large population, the country is slightly smaller than half the size of Greece, and the language spoken there is Lithuanian. The main religion is Roman Catholic, with more than 3/4 of the population participating in it. Finally, though, their dream came true, and they made their way out to Lithuania. Denise absolutely loved being a part of sharing God's love and message with the Lithuanian children that she mentored. But after about a year, it was time to return home because the Leutholds were about to welcome a new baby of their own into the world. Shortly after arriving back in 2000, their son Seth was born. Now it was time to give their full attention to their own child and devote their time to him. But not too long after Seth was born, Denise found out she was pregnant again. She gave birth to their first daughter, Julia, and by 2002, the Leuthold family returned to Lithuania, living there on and off for the next 8 years. They would spend time there and then return to the US for a little while until they saved enough money to go back again. Even though Denise was excited about their work in Lithuania, it was really difficult for her to be alone with 2 young children in a strange country. She didn't have any family there or any friends to support her, and she missed her family and loved ones. They were missing out on seeing little Seth and Julia growing up. Diane, Denise's mom, thought it was actually really traumatic for her daughter to go through this, but Denise knew that this meant so much to Nathan, so she powered through it. She wanted to be the strong, supportive wife that she believed God wanted her to be. Denise decided to make the most of her time in Lithuania by sharing her love of Jesus and her faith through music. Her role at the church was to teach the young girls Bible stories and play the piano. Denise devoted her time to children and their families, and she and Nathan even helped women who were in very toxic and dangerous relationships, getting them to places where they would be cared for. In addition, they helped several Lithuanian people come to the United States to study, play sports, or work, sometimes sponsoring students and helping them get set up financially, or assisting them with learning the culture in the United States. One family they got very close to was the Dobalida family, who they met back in the early 2000s. They had a little 6-year-old at the time named Ina, and she was there with her family, helping as much as they possibly could. By 2010, Denise was expecting baby number 3, little Janelle. So once again, the family made plans to go back and spend time in the United States until after the baby was born. They went back to live with Denise's parents while they worked, raised their children, and raised money to return to Lithuania. They wanted to raise enough money so that they could also sponsor students and assist families. A few years later, in 2013, the Leuthold family was still living in the United States with Denise's parents, Diane and Doug. You may remember this home, 700 West Mossville Road. It's where both of them lived when they were saving up the first time to go to Lithuania. It was probably a little cramped with Denise's mom and dad, plus the Leutholds and their 3 children. It was just a 3-bedroom home with 3 bathrooms, Maybe it was just enough for the two couples to have their own rooms, and the kids to take the third. At the time, Seth was 12, Julia was 10, and little Janelle was only 4. They really did have a growing family, and it was very generous of Denise's family to allow them to stay there. Denise was really happy to be back at home in Illinois with her family and friends. Besides being reunited with her loved ones, being back in the United States allowed Nathan to visit various Baptist churches and raise funds for their next mission trip to Lithuania, which was still his #1 passion. But a part of me kind of thought that the reason Denise wanted to get pregnant again was to move back to the United States. I could tell through everything I've read that it made her really homesick to be there, no matter how much she wanted to do for her husband. But let's go to Thursday, February 14, 2013, Valentine's Day. It was a normal weekday, except it was a holiday. When the Lutholds were back in the United States, they took pride in the American holidays, making sure their children got to celebrate Christmas, Thanksgiving, even Valentine's Day. So that morning, Seth, Julia, and Janelle woke up to find that Denise had laid out gifts for them on the kitchen table. The night before, Nathan had purchased a card and a rose for Denise, and left them on the table as well for his wife of almost 18 years. After the Luthold family exchanged their Valentine's Day gifts, the day continued as usual. Seth and Julia attended school, Nathan ran errands, and Denise took Janelle to her pre-K session at 12:15 p.m. Both of Denise's parents went to work. At around 3 p.m., though, Nathan was on his way to pick up Janelle from daycare, and Denise was supposed to pick up Julia. However, Nathan was surprised when he received a phone call from his dad, Bruce, asking, "Hey, do you need help getting Julia from school?" Nathan was confused. He's like, "What do you mean?" Well, it turns out, according to Nathan's dad, the school called him and said that Denise had never arrived to pick Julia up. She was just sitting there, waiting. Nathan told his father to wait a few minutes because he knew Denise would most likely be on her way to the school. She was probably just late. Maybe she was stuck in traffic, or her errands ran longer than usual. Denise was very responsible. This was unlike her, very out of character. Nathan started to call Denise, but she didn't answer. He texted her, but those messages were not returned. As soon as he hung up with his father, Nathan called him back and said, "You know what? Just go ahead and pick up Julia, because I don't know where Denise is." Nathan also added, "I'm going to go to the house and see what the reason is for her not being there. Maybe she forgot." When Nathan pulled up into their driveway, he was immediately concerned. The garage door was wide open, which was very odd, and Denise's vehicle was nowhere to be found. Nathan parked his car in the driveway and began to walk around the home. He got about halfway through the backyard and noticed that something was wrong. He looked back into the garage and saw that something just didn't seem right. So he went back to the garage, and that's when he saw broken glass. The door between the garage and the home had broken glass in it. He thought that someone might have broken into their home, so Nathan ran back to his car, where little Janelle was still waiting in the back seat. He quickly got in, backed his car out of the driveway, and parked it in the neighbor's driveway across the street. Then he called 911. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know if the person was still inside. Nathan wasn't a confrontational person. He would rather the burglar take all their material possessions, which don't mean anything, than risk something happening to his family. In the meantime, as he waited for the police to arrive, Nathan continued to call Denise, her relatives, and her friends, hoping that someone had heard from her. But no one had. 2 officers arrived a few minutes later, pulling into the Newtons' driveway. They looked around for the man who made the 911 call, but they couldn't locate Nathan. That's when they realized he was parked at the neighbor's house. An officer spotted him holding his little daughter across the street at 703 West Mossville Road. The officer walked over to Nathan and asked, "What is going on?" Nathan told the officer that he had just returned home from picking up his youngest daughter from school. When he came to the house, he saw the garage door open and some broken glass. He explained that, prior to this, he had been calling his wife, who had failed to pick up their 10-year-old daughter from her school. It also seemed like his wife's phone was off, No one was able to get a hold of her. Nathan thought maybe she was at home, running late, but her car wasn't there. The officers made their way over to the Newtons' home. Meanwhile, Nathan called Denise's mom, Diane, who was still at work. He told his mother-in-law that it looked like someone had broken into their home and no one could get in touch with Denise. Diane left work and raced over immediately. Meanwhile, the officers surveyed the outside of the Newtons' home. They didn't find any forced entry, but they did find a muddy puddle in the backyard. However, there were no footprints or other disturbances in it. The officers decided to enter through the open garage. Since they didn't know what they were about to walk into, one officer called for backup before entering the home. The officer then headed back to the front of the house to wait for backup. Nathan was still in his car outside the neighbor's home with his daughter. After the second officer arrived, they entered the house and noticed something strange. The drawers were pulled out in the kitchen, all the kitchen cabinets were open, and all the kitchen drawers were ransacked. Things had definitely been rummaged through. It looked like they were dealing with a robbery. But it got worse. As the officers approached the house's entryway, they discovered a woman lying face down on the floor. She was wearing her winter coat and gloves, and it looked like she had just come inside and was knocked to the ground. They could even see her glasses lying right next to her. That's when they saw it, a pool of blood under her matted hair. There was a shell casing and a live round near the woman's head, and a set of car keys were tangled in her hair. They surmised that she'd come inside as the burglar was ransacking the house and was killed as a result. The officers stepped outside and immediately called dispatch, alerting the department that there was a murder at the scene. After grabbing their bulletproof shields, the officers re-entered the home and cleared it room by room to make sure the intruder was gone. The house was empty, except for the deceased female, and they didn't know who this woman was. Considering that Denise had been missing and was unable to be reached, they believed it was most likely her. However, they didn't want to upset Nathan before they knew for sure. So, they went outside to gather more information from him. But Nathan and his daughter Janelle were no longer in the car. They had actually gone into their neighbor's home. After knocking on the neighbor's door and requesting that Nathan come outside, the officers asked him for a description of Denise's vehicle so they could see if the keys they found matched it. But as Nathan began telling the officers what kind of car she drove, detectives back at the Newtons' home started to put up the yellow crime scene tape and cordon off the area. Nathan was just sitting there, watching anxiously from across the street. The detectives on the scene thought the same thing as the first responders. Since Denise was wearing her coat and gloves when she was shot in the head, the detectives concluded that her shooter had ambushed her as she walked inside. There was no sign of a murder weapon at the crime scene, but it appeared to be a .40 caliber handgun. Although they didn't have an official identification through, let's say, an autopsy, the detectives matched Denise's body to pictures of her. Now they needed to notify Nathan about the horrific news that his wife of almost 2 decades, the mother of his 3 children, his soulmate, was dead. The thing is, Nathan already knew, and no, it wasn't a gut instinct or anything spiritual, his father told him. His father called Nathan and said, "I'm on my way. I just heard on the radio that local news said someone was found shot in your home." Nathan figured it had to be Denise because everyone else was accounted for. It was as if time had stopped. He was in disbelief. He covered his face and embraced his beautiful, curly-haired 4-year-old daughter, Janelle, who was the spitting image of her mother. He didn't know what he was going to do. His young daughter just smiled at him, not even understanding the gravity of what had just happened. Now, it was time for the officers to notify Denise's other family members. But Diane was already approaching her street and noticed the road was blocked off. She couldn't pass. Concerned for her daughter, Diane abandoned her vehicle and tried to run to her home, but the officers wouldn't let her in. She kept saying, "I don't understand. I just need to get in there. Where's my daughter? What happened?" Eventually, they were able to calm her down and told her that they needed her to come down to the police station so they could gather more information from her. It didn't take long after that for the police to inform her, in no uncertain terms, that her daughter Denise had been shot and that she did not survive. Diane called it the worst day of her life, and I can't even imagine that pain. Then she had to do something that takes a lot of courage. Diane had to notify her husband that their beloved daughter had passed away. When Denise's dad, Doug, heard that his daughter had been killed, he couldn't contain his sadness. He was an absolute mess. His little girl, even though she was 39 at the time, his little girl was gone. It was unbelievable. And of course, the word traveled fast. It was shocking for everyone close to the family and the community. A murder on Valentine's Day, the day of love, had happened to a loving person, someone who had devoted their whole life to helping others. No one could understand why this was happening. But if it was random, then of course, the thief didn't care who they were when they crossed his path. For this couple, they were so kind, and their Faith Baptist Church community was devastated. This was a family they had helped raise funds for missionary work. In this post from back in 2012, just a year before the tragedy, the church said, "We received a call from Nathan Luthold, our missionary to Lithuania. He's going to be passing through tomorrow night and will be in our Wednesday night service." It's obvious that the church held Nathan in high regard and looked forward to his presence. Now they had to deal with the reality of his wife's absence, and everyone wanted answers. And they might just get some. An officer located Denise's vehicle down the street at Robinson Park shortly after taking Nathan's description of her car. When I say down the street, it's a 1-minute drive from the home, about a 10-minute walk. In addition, it's a large natural area with forests for hiking and lots of land around. It looked like this may have been the getaway car. Maybe the perpetrator used it to flee from the scene, then dumped it in this nearby park and ran on foot. After Denise's body was found, Nathan was escorted by a detective to the police station for questioning. At the beginning of the interview, the detectives asked Nathan if he and Denise had any problems. Nathan said no. Losing Denise was like losing his foundation. He explained that they had always been inseparable. Denise was his best friend since 3rd grade, the mother of his 3 children, the most important people in Nathan's life, and he had no idea how he was going to live without her. During the interview, the detectives asked Nathan to sign off on several search warrants, which he did. The warrants included the bedroom where Denise and Nathan slept, as well as Nathan and Denise's vehicles, their cell phones, laptops, and hard drives. Denise's parents were also more than willing to give crime scene investigators access to their entire home. They wanted to find any evidence to identify who would have murdered their daughter, and they felt like this was quite the mystery. When Nathan was asked what Denise did that morning, he said she woke up around 6:45 a.m., which was usual. While Denise woke up their children for school, Nathan got into the shower, shaving, and doing his everyday routine. Before Nathan drove his 2 older children to school, they exchanged their Valentine's gifts. Nathan told the detective he had stopped at a spa and picked up a $75 gift card for Denise. After dropping his children off at school, he said that Denise stayed home with their daughter all morning until she drove her to daycare around noon. Detectives were very thankful for this information. It was very helpful. That timeline and routine were significant. With this information, they thought that maybe they could pull up some surveillance footage to see if anyone had been following Denise or if there was anything out of the ordinary. They told Nathan that it was imperative to find out when the last time she had been seen was, so they could narrow down the time frame of when Denise was murdered. She was supposed to go shopping after she dropped Janelle off at her pre-K session, and according to Nathan, Denise was supposed to pick up their older daughter, Julia, at middle school. However, she never showed up. Nathan told the detectives that he drove home to check on Denise, and that's when he saw the signs of a break-in at the house. Basically everything we already know. They asked Nathan if Denise had any problems with anyone, and he said no, they got along with everyone. They were well liked at the church, and they had actually just returned to Illinois from Lithuania a few years ago. He didn't think they had been back long enough to make any enemies. Of course, they had to ask him some uncomfortable questions. One's about marriage, specifically whether Denise had ever done anything behind his back, had any affairs, or had any boyfriends. Nathan said no. Then they asked, well, what about you? Again, he said no. He described Denise as the main one who held her entire family together. She sounded like an amazing person. As a matter of fact, anyone the detectives spoke to about Denise only had good things to say about this woman. She was nearly perfect, a great mother, wife, and friend. Anyone who knew her loved her. Whenever the detectives asked Nathan if anything valuable inside the home was missing, he said no. The only thing he could think of was maybe two $200 watches, but nothing else high-end. Sometime at the end of the interview, Nathan was getting tired. It had been a long time, and he had been away from his children. He really wanted to get back to them. He said, "Help me get back to my kids tonight." One of the detectives responded, "We hope you will be." Nathan added, "I can't leave them all night long." Finally, they let Nathan leave. They were very thankful for all the information he provided and wanted to get on the case ASAP. Detectives interviewed Nathan for over 6 hours. After leaving the police station at 12:30 on February 15, 2013, he headed to his sister's house to spend time with his children and grieve the loss of their mother and his wife. Residents in Peoria, Illinois, where Denise and Nathan lived, were terrified after hearing that even the police thought there could be a crazy killer on the loose. They were holding press conferences and telling people they needed to be on high alert. The schools were on lockdown. Residents were scared for their lives because this happened in the middle of the day. It could have been anyone. Things like this just didn't happen there. This was a place where kids played in the streets, and everyone trusted one another and knew one another. Now, the streets were bare. Everyone was scared. Since Nathan and Denise did not live in a high-crime area, residents began to be extra cautious. This was a big story, and although residents were triple-checking their doors and windows, an eerie feeling came over the town. They were panicked and paranoid. An investigation into Denise's murder began immediately. Detectives did confirm that a laptop, 2 guns, a digital camera, and several pieces of jewelry had been stolen from the home, and they were never recovered. Among the missing guns was a .40 caliber Glock, which was the same weapon that investigators believe Denise was shot with. Then they got a very important piece of evidence when they were searching through reports at the police station. They came across a report from just 2 days before Denise's murder. It was made by Nathan. What they could gather from this report was that it was made on February 12, 2013. Shortly after midnight, Nathan called to report a suspicious vehicle that was outside, driving in the neighborhood. It even parked in their driveway, and in the driveway directly across the street. Officer Needham responded to the call, but by the time he arrived, the car was no longer there. The officer searched the area, but didn't find anything suspicious. He asked, "Should I go speak to your neighbors?" Nathan discussed it with him, and they decided it wasn't necessary to wake people up and disturb them at that time of the night. At that point, it was just a suspicious car driving around the neighborhood and parking in their driveway. But what was this all about? Was this car casing the neighborhood, looking for homes to hit? That's what they thought. The detectives wanted to know more, so Nathan told them about the suspicious car he had seen a few weeks ago. He said he saw it more than once, which is why it was really peculiar. He said that the first time it pulled into their driveway without any headlights on, which was odd because they had their lights on when they were on the road. But when the car pulled into the driveway, they switched them off. So Nathan went to the front door, turned on the outside light, and as soon as he did, the car backed up and left. It happened again for the second time just 2 days before Denise's murder, which is why he decided to call the police this time. The car pulled into the neighbor's driveway, but it was clearly the same car. Now they were gathering all that information to look and see if they could find it. After the media reported Denise's murder, Diane Parrish, a neighbor of Nathan and Denise, contacted the detectives. She said that sometime in the afternoon on February 14th, she saw a man walking in the direction of Denise's home. He was wearing a black hooded sweatshirt with the hood up over his head and his hands in his pockets. Diane Parrish was concerned about this man because of the way his face looked. She said she could tell he was agitated and something was wrong. That was pretty terrifying, since Diane Parrish saw this man walking around Robinson Park. She had to notify detectives when she heard that Denise's car was found there. Then another neighbor reported hearing a gunshot between 12:30 and 12:45 p.m., which is around the same time detectives think Denise was shot. If Denise stumbled across an intruder in her home, why would they kill her in cold blood? This was an issue that several detectives were having difficulty understanding. Maybe Denise's murder was not part of a robbery at all, but something else entirely, something more sinister. At first glance, it appeared to be a robbery gone wrong, but investigators realized a robbery turned murder was not common. In the days following Denise's murder, Nathan stayed at his sister's house with his 3 children. Nathan's mom and sister comforted him and helped him grieve the loss of his wife. They also helped him explain to Seth, Julia, and Janelle that their mom had died. Nathan sat all of his children down and told them their mommy had been called home to be with God. He told his children that their mommy was loved and that she loved them very much. After that, Nathan said that they all hugged and cried with one another, but they also prayed and thanked the Lord for giving them such a wonderful wife and mother. On February 19th, Faith Baptist Church posted this on Facebook. Nathan and Denise Leuthold are missionaries to Lithuania that our church has supported through the years. They have been on furlough, and Denise was murdered in Peoria last week. Her funeral is today. We will be taking up a love offering Sunday to give towards the fund they've set up for their 3 young children. Please pray for them and leads in the investigation. Nathan then moved his family to the church mission home. His parents told his friends that Nathan left his sister's home out of fear for his family's safety. The person who killed Denise could return and take out the rest of their family, including their children. So, Nathan was concerned that they were in danger, which was smart. It's better to be safe. The church members were helping out by bringing home-cooked meals to them, but life just wasn't the same. Nathan and the kids were changed. Sometimes they would just stare into space, still in shock. When the crime scene had been cleared and cleaned, Denise's parents, Diane and Doug, asked Nathan to come by with the children so they could be with their family. But Nathan was overcome with emotion and was really hesitant about bringing the children back to where their mother was killed. The children were too afraid, which is completely understandable. It would be very traumatic and hard. Of course, Diane and Doug Newton kept thinking about their daughter's murder. Diane worked at a store that sold high-definition TVs, and their home had a lot of electronic equipment in it, but it was all accounted for. In fact, in the living room, the officers found all the electronic devices, including a TV and a Blu-ray player, in their proper places. Nothing of value seemed to be gone. Everything was still available for the taking. Back in 2013, Blu-ray players were, I don't know if you remember this, the hottest item on the market. The Newtons had several expensive DVD players in their home, but they weren't stolen by the person who killed Denise. However, the murderer did take 3 of Diane's rings, and she wondered how this person who killed her daughter would even know that those rings were worth anything. Detectives began asking the same questions as Denise's parents. Despite everything that they were observing, they didn't think the crime scene looked like a real robbery. One of the first strange things that detectives noticed was the neatly arranged junk drawers on the kitchen floor. Yes, the drawers were removed, but they were placed neatly on the floor, like someone was concerned with making a mess. The officers noted that nothing was scattered around. The drawers were there, but you would assume if someone broke in and was rummaging through things, there would be a mess all around. Even more confusing was why a burglar would go through a junk drawer full of pens and scissors. It was obvious when you opened it up that there was nothing significant in there whatsoever, so why waste your time? It didn't fit the normal MO. Another thing, one of the missing guns belonged to Nathan. It just happened to be the same caliber weapon responsible for shooting his wife in the head. Nathan owned a few guns, a 12-gauge shotgun, a .22 pistol, and a .40 caliber Glock. He said he kept the .40 caliber in a gun case. So detectives asked, "How hard is it to open this case? Do you have to use a crowbar?" He replied, "No, nothing like that." "Okay, so the killer broke open a gun case," they asked. Nathan said, "Yeah, I guess so, but there was no broken gun case on the scene." They asked him what he thought happened to the gun case, and Nathan said, "Well, Denise's murderer must have taken it with him when he fled." Really? You know what they're thinking, right? They're starting to look at the husband. They always do. No matter how good of a person you are, if you're close to the victim, you're going to be on their radar. After shooting somebody in the head, detectives find it very difficult to believe a killer would have just stopped and then taken a broken gun case. You know, he had to open it up somehow, right? With him, a gun case that Nathan owned. The murderer would have probably wanted to get out of that house immediately. He wouldn't have wasted time looking for the gun case that he broke so that he could take it with him. It would also be another thing for him to carry. The detectives asked Nathan when the last time he fired this weapon was, and he said it was about 2 weeks ago. "I was in Oklahoma and I shot my .40 caliber Glock." But other things started to look suspicious as well. When the investigators initially came to the scene, Nathan didn't ask the police why they were entering the home with giant bulletproof shields. Wouldn't you be concerned if they were entering your house like that? Most people would, but Nathan did not seem concerned at all. Later, as Nathan was starting to tell the officer what kind of car his wife drove, the officer thought it was odd that he didn't even ask why. Wouldn't he want to know if they found anything inside? Nothing. Not one question. Not to mention the fact he already knew his wife was dead, which, according to him, was related to him. Another thing detectives couldn't understand was how the killer drove Denise's car. Recall that they found a set of car keys matted in her blood-soaked hair. Did he hotwire the car, or did someone use a spare set? Detectives asked Nathan whether he knew if there was a spare set of keys to Denise's car, and he said, "I don't know. Anytime I drove Denise's car, she just gave me her keys." They asked when the last time he drove it was, and he said, "I don't know, maybe like a year ago." But what didn't make sense was if the killer had to use a set of spare car keys, they had to be somewhere in the house that could be easily accessible, especially because there was no evidence that the ignition had been tampered with. So the car was not hot-wired, he used the key. So where did he get this key? Detectives wanted to know and asked Nathan if his car was ever at Robinson Park that day. He actually said yes, which is very odd. He said, "Yeah, I was sometime in the early morning," and then backtracked and said, "Well, it wasn't like early, it was just earlier before I came back to the house." They wanted to know why, and Nathan explained, "Oh, I just pulled over to take a phone call." Dude, you were 1 minute away from being home. That really did not make any sense. Still, the weirdest statement yet came from Nathan when he was driving with them to the police station. When they passed Robinson Park, one of the detectives heard Nathan whisper, "The car's gone." If you didn't catch that, he said, "The car's gone," under his breath, almost as though he didn't know he was saying it out loud. It was shocking to him at that point. However, Nathan had not been told that anyone found Denise's car at the park. So why would he say that? It's looking like Nathan has some explaining to do, but first investigators want to take a deeper dive to see what they can find out about him. I definitely was not ready for this at all. The detectives confronted Nathan with everything. The fact that there's a missing .40 caliber just like the one he owned, plus the case, and Denise's car was moved seemingly by magic, since supposedly there were no spare keys. He fails to mention that his car was also at the park where they found her car that day. But he didn't have much to say. He kept saying, "I don't have the answer," when they asked him why he didn't mention that he was at the park. His excuse for not telling them he was at the park was because he just took a short phone call. But they didn't like what they were hearing and putting together. Let's go back to what they found inside the home. While searching in Diane and Doug Newton's home, the investigators uncovered $300 in a drawer, Denise's wallet, her purse, and then they found a day planner with a bunch of notes jotted down by Denise. It had quotes, scriptures, information about the kids' school, but one entry really stood out to detectives. Denise's entry was written to Nathan and painted a very different picture of their relationship, different than the one Nathan claimed he had with his wife. Additionally, this entry in the day planner might have hinted at Nathan's motive for murdering Denise, if he was indeed her. The entry reads, "What on earth could you possibly be thinking? I can't imagine anything you could tell me that would hurt me worse than what you're doing to me right now. I don't think there's anything I've done or not done to deserve this. I have tried to please you for 17 years and never succeeded, never been enough, never done enough. I know you want me dead. I'm not stupid. I suppose I will confirm my worthlessness to you when I write that I'm not brave enough to do that job for you. And now, all of a sudden, you're taking me with you to places? What is that all about? Maybe you think I don't feel bad enough. You act like you're somehow noble because you won't tell me why you're doing this. It makes me sick. I have been willing at any time to fall in love with you again, but you reject me every time. I wish I could hate you. I've tried to hate you because I thought it would make it easier. I thought it wouldn't hurt so bad. Of course, I couldn't do so, failed at that too. I've been without pride, humiliating myself to try and win something that belongs to me. You don't seem to care. Well, I quit. I'm not going to try and please you anymore. I'll do what I have to do, but no more of that game. You want to humiliate me by running around with a 20-year-old? Fine. I won't grovel. If I have not pleased you in 17 years, nothing I do now will, and I refuse to leave my children just because you decided to do this to me. You're the only person who thinks that I'm a bad mother. Complete strangers compliment me on them, so I will not join you in obsession for perfection. I'm the same person I've always been. I am not weaker, and in many ways, I am stronger. I refuse to play to your perfectionism. I have borne neglect and criticism and kept going, but now this. How long are you going to do this to me? Oh yeah, until I break. That's what you said, isn't it? Well, happy waiting." That is a letter and words from a wife who is grieving. She's grieving the loss of the love of her life. Clearly, there were issues in their relationship. The detectives wanted to know who the 20-year-old girl that Denise was referring to in her note was. When the detectives received their records from Nathan's cell phone, they found out who Denise was alluding to. When they looked at who that phone call came in from, the one that he said he had to pull over in the park to receive, the park that was only 1 minute away from the house, it all seemed to make sense. It was one of the foreign exchange students that they were sponsoring. But when I tell you her name, I hope it rings a bell. Ina Dobelaite. You've heard this name before, remember? She was the little 6-year-old girl I mentioned earlier in this story. During their time in Lithuania, the Leuthold family became friends with the double Latte family, which included their young daughter, Ina. The Leutholds and this family became acquainted in 1998. Denise and Nathan could see that little Ina was dedicated to God and her faith. She had given herself to the Lord, and Ina's mother was the one who truly helped Denise and Nathan get acquainted with everything in Lithuania. She took the men, taught them the language, and helped them. Ina's mother was also always doing a lot for others and for the church, and Nathan was enamored with the way that little Ina followed her in her footsteps. Because it makes my stomach turn. She's 6, well, she was 16. Ina started babysitting for Denise and Nathan's children and participating in Denise's music lessons. Like Denise, Ina was a talented musician. She dreamed of studying music in the Bible in America, and then she wanted to return to Lithuania to use her skills as a musician to help connect people with God. The Leutholds wanted to help, especially Nathan. I wonder why. It's like she's a younger version of Denise. In 2010, when Ina turned 18, Denise and Nathan agreed to sponsor her to come to the United States on a student visa. She enrolled in a Christian university in Pensacola, Florida, and Nathan decided to open up a joint bank account for himself and Ina so that he could easily help fund things. For about 2 years, Nathan was the one who took care of Ina's living expenses. During any school breaks, she would actually fly to Illinois and stay with Denise and Nathan. But during Ina's time in Pensacola, Nathan was frequently traveling from Illinois to Florida to visit this teenager. She stayed with her sponsor. No, that is just wrong. No, and the Christian university did not agree with this. They didn't take well to the fact that she was sleeping off campus with her older married sponsor, so they put her on academic probation, as they should. I mean, I understand they're both technically adults, but this is just inappropriate. Before the Christian university suspended her, Ina decided to leave the school and move to Illinois. She transferred to a non-religious school called Illinois Central College, which was a community college. She also decided to live in the basement of Denise's parents' home, the one that Denise and Nathan and their children were also living in. He moved her right in under his wife's nose. But of course, Denise is a wonderful woman. She loves helping people. So while Ina's living with her sponsors, Nathan would take her to a spa. It was called Five Senses Spa in Peoria, and he paid for Ina's massages, waxing, and hair services. This was the same spa that Nathan told detectives he bought a gift card for Denise for. Remember that Valentine's Day gift card for like $74? Well, this information definitely interested the detectives. They drove out to the Five Senses Spa and wanted to question the employees about Nathan. The detectives asked the staff if they remembered Nathan and Ina, and they said, "Oh yeah, we assumed they were together, that they were a couple." However, the employees reported to detectives that Nathan shocked them on Valentine's Day when he asked for a gift certificate for his wife. They're sitting there writing like, "To Denise," and thinking, well, who's the other girl he's been bringing in here? As the detectives probed deeper into Nathan and Ina's relationship, they found out that, in their opinion, it was much more than just a sponsored student type of relationship. In the summers of 2011 and 2012, the two of them frequently visited Cougarplex, a sports complex in Illinois, and they went there without Denise. They watched the games and had fun. They also stayed in luxury hotels several times during the winter of 2012. Again, Denise did not go with her husband on these visits. No, while in Chicago, Nathan bought Ina an expensive coat and paid for dinners at high-end restaurants. The investigators also found evidence that Nathan and Ina traveled together on horseback without Denise at the Cook County Forest Preserve, these little outings with her sponsor. However, Ina was no longer living with the Lutholds at the time that Denise was killed. She had actually transferred to a Christian university back in Chicago called the Moody Bible Institute. It was 160 miles away from where they were and where Denise was murdered. But before Denise's murder, Diane, her mom, actually had this weird feeling about everything that was going on. Of course she did. She actually confronted her daughter and said, "How do you feel about your husband having this relationship with Ina? Are you jealous that he's traveling with this teenager all alone?" According to Diane, Denise said no, that Ina was like family. Denise told her mom that she understood and supported Ina's decision to get help from Nathan while she was living in the United States. Nathan was the only person who could speak fluent Lithuanian, and Denise said that she supported their friendship. She trusted him, and she probably shouldn't have, but they had sponsored a number of other students before. She didn't think she had anything to worry about. Detectives reviewed the text messages on Nathan and Denise's cell phone records, and Nathan's texts to his wife were very different from the ones he sent to Ina. Most of the messages that Nathan exchanged with Denise were mundane. They lacked emotion and were almost always about the children, like what they were doing, confirming pickup times, drop-off times, things like that. They were not flirtatious or passionate. But when it came to Nathan and Ina, these weren't just conversations about scripture. The detectives were actually able to recover some messages that Nathan thought he had deleted. In one exchange between the two of them, it was the afternoon before Denise's murder. Ina says, "I'm going to the gym," and Nathan responds, "Without me?" When she was done, she said, "Done with the gym," and Nathan replies with, "What?" This man is asking her if she is, what, and I know he does not mean from the shower or her sweaty workout. She responds with, "A little bit," and Nathan says, "But you smell good. You are also beautiful." He doesn't have game. He doesn't. Those are like, what? But really, come on, You're asking this young girl if she is wet? No. Having gathered sufficient background information on Ina, the detectives drove to Chicago to question her regarding her relationship with Nathan. They wanted to start out very simply. They didn't want to tip her off about the fact that they knew there might be more going on with her and Nathan. They asked the basics. How do you know the Leutholds? How long have you known them? Can you tell me a little bit about the family? But as they got into more probing questions, guess what happened? Ina, who had been speaking complete fluent English, suddenly started to say, "I don't understand the question. I don't understand." Really? She just stared at them, stone cold, and refused to answer any other questions about Denise. The detectives tried to shock her. They put crime scene photos, bloody crime scene photos, and Denise's autopsy photos in front of her, and she never responded. They were frustrated by the lack of emotion from this girl, so they called her out. One of the detectives, who was a badass, I love the way he went about this because I watched some of these interviews, was just going hard. He said, "These people brought you to America from Lithuania. They treated you like family, and now this woman is dead and it doesn't bother you?" She just looked at him and said, "I cried enough over the weekend." But you couldn't understand why it didn't seem like she cared. And it didn't end there. During the interview, the detective questioned her about the trips to the spa. This detective was like, "Listen, if my wife ever found out that I was taking a 20-year-old for waxes and massage appointments, I would be kicked out of the house. My stuff would be on the front yard." This made no sense to him, so he said, "What is all of this about?" The detective was relentless. He even went so far as to literally confront her and say, "What did you need waxing with Nathan there?" And she just did not respond. I mean, this detective was ballsy. He was literally like, what exactly was he getting waxed up for, huh? When the detectives asked Ina if she and Nathan had a sexual relationship, she denied it. They said, "Okay, well, why did you switch schools?" They already knew why, but they wanted to hear it from her. She said she injured her hands while she was studying piano and had to leave. She didn't say she was kicked out, but the investigators were aware of the scandal she was involved in, sleeping with her sponsor off campus. So now they've caught her in a lie. The official records they subpoenaed from the school stated she was dismissed for having an inappropriate relationship with her sponsor, Nathan Leuthold. The amount of text messages was also suspicious. If he was just checking in as a sponsor, there would maybe be one or two, but they carried on conversations on a regular basis. But no one in Nathan's immediate circle thought he had anything to do with what happened to Denise. He was a missionary after all, a Christian, a good-hearted person. It had to be someone else, someone pure evil. However, one day, the minister from their own church came to talk to Denise's parents. The first question out of his mouth to Denise's mother was, "Do you think Nathan had anything to do with this?" That was shocking, but there was a reason why he wanted to know. It was to confirm his own suspicions about something he had seen that didn't sit right with him. He had seen Nathan and Ina driving around together alone several months before Denise's death. To him, the fact that Denise wasn't with them made it look like there was something more going on with this couple. Later, he said that he called Denise and Nathan into his office for a meeting and cautioned Nathan about his behavior. The minister told him, in front of Denise, that it wasn't a good look and that this behavior could potentially be detrimental to the ministry. He warned Nathan that the church could withhold his funds. They had been providing him financial support to fund his missionary work, $2,500 twice a week from various churches around the country. Well, that explains why he told Little Miss to move 160 miles away. After this happened, the detectives decided to take a deeper look into Nathan's whereabouts on Valentine's Day 2013. They examined CCTV footage from Starbucks, Chase Bank, and all around town where Nathan claimed to have stopped. The detectives also asked 5 Senses Spa for their footage from that day. When they reviewed the footage, they found Nathan was indeed at these locations on February 14th. However, his whereabouts could only be accounted for until 11:30 a.m. There was a gap between the time he exited Starbucks at 11:30 a.m. Men returned to that same Starbucks at 12:40 and 35 seconds p.m. Detectives thought Denise was actually murdered during that exact time frame. They even found a route that Nathan could have taken from Starbucks to Robinson Park, where he could have walked to the house, then driven Denise's car back to the park, grabbed his car, and went back to Starbucks. According to the investigators, they traveled this route, and it only took them 6 minutes and 55 seconds. Of course, you have to account for the time it would have taken to commit the crime and walking to and from the park and the house, a 10-minute walk. So let's say 25 to 30 minutes. The detective said this was not only possible, but probably what happened. It was easier to think that Nathan did this than some random person who just happened to be in the area. Broke in, stole things, rummaged around, found a gun and a spare set of keys, heard a woman coming, broke into the gun case, got the gun, killed this person, and then either searched around for the spare keys and/or broken gun case before fleeing the scene. It didn't make sense. And guess what? After scouring the park, an officer discovered fleece gloves about 50 feet away from the car and a set of spare car keys in a trash can. So there were spare keys after all. On top of that, they found a black hoodie crumpled on the floor of Denise and Nathan's room. It looked like it had been taken off in a hurry and just thrown there. It matched the one the neighbor said she saw a man wearing on his way from Robinson Park to the Newtons' home on the day of the murder. A couple of weeks later, law enforcement was analyzing reports they had requested. They finally came back and were from Nathan's laptop. Nathan cleverly had set the browser to not save his history, so anytime he would search something, it would just disappear. However, forensic programs make it easy to uncover these deleted searches. When are we going to learn that you can't outsmart smart devices? They found disturbing internet searches that had been conducted using Nathan's personal laptop, including phrases like "below to the head," "hitting someone over the head to knock them out," "how to cause sleep paralysis," "sleep-inducing drugs," "methods to take your own life," and "lethal injection." Dying by injecting air, murder with insulin, drowning in a bathtub, electrocution in a tub, or how to kill yourself with insulin. Where to buy potassium chloride, how to hide the sound of a gunshot, how to silence a Glock 40, which is the exact gun he owned and the type used to kill Denise. And finally, he searched for how to erase everything from an iPad. These searches span the last few months, so he was sitting there thinking about and searching different ways to murder his wife. That's not what he said happened. Wait, because he has an explanation for these searches. I couldn't believe it. First, he denies ever killing Denise, of course. And for the searches, are you ready for this? He says, "We started a foundation overseas called Hope for Tomorrow, and it was to combat people taking their own lives." He literally said that he was doing research, looking at websites that desperate people used to get information about what they were going to do in their last moments. Cool story, bro. On March 6, 2013, only 3 weeks after Denise was murdered, Nathan Leuthold was arrested for first-degree murder. They pulled him over right after he dropped his kids off at school. They put handcuffs on him and put him in the back of a cop car. He sat there and was like, "What's going on?" You're gonna jail," they said. He's like, "What for?" He acted shocked. "Your wife's murder." It was definitely shocking. It was shocking for the community, that's for sure. Everyone who knew this family did not expect this to happen. Some didn't and wouldn't believe it. Many people who had known Nathan for years said that the only reason they were putting him behind bars was because the police couldn't solve the case, so they needed to place blame on someone. But men do this all the time. I mean, women do too, but men do it more. Even Denise's mom would not believe it. This was someone she knew since he was a child. She had to wait for it to all play out in court, and Nathan maintained his innocence. He said that Denise was the one he would go to in any difficult time to ask what to do, and that he found himself doing that in the days after her death. Like, what do we do with the kids? He just wanted to be able to call her and talk to her. Well, like I said, I've heard and seen this before. It's the same song and dance from Stephen Grant, who dismembered his wife and stuffed her in a Rubbermaid container, so it means nothing to me. It's alligator tears. After his arrest, Nathan filed several pre-trial motions. His first motion was to suppress all the statements he made the day of Denise's murder on February 14, 2013. He claimed he'd never been informed of his Miranda rights before his 6-hour interview. Nathan's sister, father, and several detectives appeared before the court during a 2-day hearing in March 2014. The court reviewed Nathan's interview in its entirety, and after hearing the detective's testimony and reviewing the footage, the court determined that the language used by the police was never confusing. Additionally, the court noted that Nathan spoke coherently and appeared confident during his interview. He also received several phone calls. Some of those were from Ina. And while Nathan was alone in the room, about 2 hours and 53 minutes into the interview, he called his dad. According to the court's interpretation of these recordings, Nathan never mentioned anything about wanting to leave. He didn't tell his father he wanted to speak to a lawyer, nothing like that. According to the court, however, Nathan seemed pretty concerned when his father told him that Denise's murder was broadcasted on the news and that it was on Facebook. He was even more concerned when he found out that the pastor of their church found out about her murder. Did he not think anyone would care that his wife was gone? Did he think his church wouldn't be talking about it, that this wouldn't be big news in their community? Wouldn't you want people to know so they could find the killer? But no, he was just going on about his day, telling his dad where to get clothes for the kids. It was like nothing happened. During the trial, the court heard the detective say, "No, you're not in custody. You could walk right out the door right now." There were times during the interview when Nathan opened the door himself and walked in and out of the room. There were numerous breaks taken, and approximately 3 hours and 21 minutes into the interview, he told detectives he had just spoken to his in-laws, Doug and Diane. Right afterward, he said to them, "I'm not in custody, but can I talk to you?" He said that to the investigator. So he wanted to talk, and clearly if he says "I'm not in custody," he knows that he's not in custody. So the court held that the detectives did not violate his constitutional rights when taking this statement, and they dismissed his motion. He was read his Miranda rights 4 hours in because that's when they went into the home and started asking more pressing questions. The Miranda rights were read word for word on video, and the detective asked, "Knowing these or having these rights read to you, do you wish to waive them and speak to us?" He said he did want to continue speaking to them. Finally, at 5 hours and 31 minutes, Nathan finally said, "I'm so physically tired. If you guys want to keep talking, I don't want to do this." The court said that at this time they had already finished the interview. It was only at the end of the video that Nathan said, "If the only way for me to stop this dead-end conversation is for me to exercise a right, then I need to know how to do that." Based on its review, the court found that the length of the interview, 6 hours, was not excessive, since Nathan was the person who called the police to report the crime. They found he wasn't in custody before the Miranda warnings were given, and so for all those reasons, they denied his motion to suppress. On April 23, 2014, Nathan had a court hearing for the motion he filed to suppress all the electronic information that investigators discovered. But Nathan had knowingly and voluntarily signed all the consent forms to allow the authorities to search his devices without any limits. And the court found that law enforcement properly gathered all the evidence. Nathan even attempted to bar the prosecution from presenting that letter they found in Denise's day planner. The state filed a motion on June 4, 2014, seeking a ruling that the note would be admissible. But according to Nathan, that letter violated his rights to marital privilege. That's ridiculous. If you indeed killed her, you lost your rights. After all, those were her private writings. But in the end, the court concluded that Denise's letter was spontaneous. It wasn't the result of questioning, and the letter was not written with any government involvement. So there was no evidence that Denise intended the letter to be used against Nathan. These were just her words, her thoughts. It was like her diary. So, the letter was admitted. It did not violate Nathan's constitutional rights. Jury selection for Nathan Leuthold's trial began in July 2014, and at the same time, a judge ordered that cameras be allowed in the courtroom to film the court case. This was the first of its kind for this particular county. This was a big case, an overtly religious man, a missionary at that, in an upscale neighborhood. It was of high public interest. The murder trial against Nathan began on Monday, July 14, 2014. Jody Hughes was prosecuting the case alongside Jerry Brady from the state's attorney's office. During her opening statement, she said that she didn't need a confession from Nathan to find him guilty. She stated that she would present eyewitness testimony, DNA, gunshot residue, forensic cell phone analysis, computer analysis, and a motive in the victim's own words to prove that Nathan killed his wife. The prosecutor even pointed to Nathan and said, "He did it." However, of course, according to Nathan's attorney, Hugh, the state isn't telling the whole story. He said, sure, investigators found gunshot residue on the sweatshirt Nathan wore, but he wore it when he was hunting. Of course, there was going to be gunshot residue on that. As far as the defense attorney was concerned, the state's evidence did not prove that his client murdered anyone. Diane Parrish was the first witness to take the stand. She was the neighbor and testified that she saw a man with a black hooded sweatshirt walking against traffic on the side of the road at 12:20 p.m. on February 14th, in the direction of Denise's home. It was suspicious to her because people often used that road early in the morning or in the evening after work, but never during the day. Another witness testified that she drove to her sister's house, which was near Denise's, around 12:30 on February 3rd and again on February 14th. She said that she heard a gunshot on one of those dates, and according to her, she was more than sure it was on February 14th, but she couldn't be certain. However, that goes to the time frame. Even little Miss Aina testified in Nathan's trial with the assistance of an interpreter. Before Nathan's murder trial, she invoked her Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. However, the state offered her immunity, so she changed her mind and decided to testify. While on the witness stand, Aina stated that she attended college in Pensacola, Florida, between 2010 and 2011. She talked about Nathan visiting her and the apartment they shared off campus. She also mentioned that she traveled with Nathan to Europe during the summers of 2011 and 2012 without Denise. Wow, they went across the country on these trips. The prosecutor presented photos of their horseback riding passes from the Cook County Forest Preserve, but Aina denied ever telling Nathan that she loved him. She said they were never lovers. However, according to her, Nathan emailed her on January 18, 2013, about a month before the murders, and this is what the email said. "I let you down and I'm sorry. I'm not going to make excuses. That would not be fair to you. You deserve someone who respects you and puts their relationship first, and from now on, I want to do all that I can to be that person. There's nothing more important to me than you and this relationship. I'm so blessed to have you in my life, and I know it." What does that sound like to you? It's kind of ambiguous. I can't get the gym text out of my head asking if she's wet. According to Aina, she spoke with Nathan 3 times on February 14th. At 3 p.m., Nathan sent a text to her saying that he believed there had been a robbery at the house. You know how she responded? She just said, "Interesting," and she put an emoji of a smiley face. If that's not weird, I don't know what is. Why a smiley face? Of course, she acknowledged that that reaction was inappropriate. It's as though it was planned. He said something like, "You know what? I'm going to text you. I'm going to tell you about the burglary." But since she was young and maybe there was some kind of barrier in the communication, she didn't realize that she needed to be more careful about how she responded. Aina testified that Nathan's family was paying for her attorney fees. That's right. She and his parents were in contact every single day since Nathan's arrest. Interesting, to use her words. After Denise's murder, Nathan's parents advised Aina not to talk to the police. The prosecutor also presented some jailhouse conversations between Nathan and Aina between May 16th and 18th, 2013. And guess what? They spoke in Lithuanian, even though they both spoke English fluently, and Aina attended several English-speaking colleges in the United States and received very good grades. She asked for a translator in court, even though she was proficient in both spoken and written English. That was also an excuse she brought up. She said she was closer to Nathan because he spoke Lithuanian proficiently, unlike Denise, who she said never had an interest in perfecting her language skills. One of their phone conversations, which the prosecution translated, sounded as though Nathan was coaching Aina on what to say when she was questioned. He said to explain to the detectives that she had known his family for over a decade, and then he instructed her to inform them that he was just her spiritual advisor, a clergy member, and that Denise was okay with their friendship. The detectives should know that Denise liked and prayed for Aina, so Nathan reminded her to say that. He also said, "Don't forget, clergy and their congregation talk privately, just like attorneys and clients do." Aina also testified that she did not attend Denise's funeral. She emailed her mom, Inga, in Lithuania just before the funeral. In that email, this is what she said, quote, "Everything is under God's control. He has a plan, and this is part of his plan. Everything is not as awful as it sounds. Children and Nathan are really doing well. It might be quite difficult on Monday and Tuesday, but after that it should be better. Many people are praying, it could be felt. Children cried only once when they first learned about it. Nathan and Denise's daughter did not say once that she wanted her mother, but if she needs anything, she asks for Aina. Yikes, it's like she just easily took over Denise's place. I would be rolling over in my grave if this was happening to me." The pastor of La Marche Baptist Church testified in Nathan's trial. He said he had spoken to Nathan and Denise and members of the church about Nathan and Aina being alone. The owner of the spa testified, talking about how he and Aina visited for 2 years and that Denise also visited the spa. They were never aware that Denise was Nathan's wife until he came in to buy that gift card. But it was the testimony of one witness in particular that was very damning to Nathan's defense. His name was David Smith. David met Nathan around March or April 2013 while he was serving a 14-year sentence in the county jail. The two men were housed in the same unit and would talk daily for hours. Nathan had asked David for guidance on his hypothetical legal questions, and David promised to never reveal what Nathan said. However, according to David Smith, Nathan confided in him. He said that Denise was overbearing. He even mentioned that he met another woman and was ready to move on. The prosecutor asked David if Nathan told him the name of this woman he was dating, and David responded, "I think it was Anna, Lana, something like that. Close to Aina, I guess." David Smith testified that Nathan told him that on the day of the murders, he did certain things to account for his whereabouts at certain times. He even said he purchased a Valentine's Day gift for Denise so that everything seemed normal, and that he parked his car in Robinson Park, passed through the woods, went to the house, hid in the closet, and waited for Denise to come home. David also said that Nathan was wearing something black, including a hoodie. However, he changed his clothes because he thought someone had seen him walking to the house. As Denise returned home from her errands, Nathan actually spoke to her before he killed her. According to David, Nathan shot his wife on the left side of her head. Nathan told David Smith that he chose Valentine's Day for the murder as a present for the other woman. According to Nathan, he initially considered poisoning his wife with insulin or potassium, but then decided to use a gun because it was easier. He wanted to find a silencer and deliberately went to places like Starbucks and the bank, just hanging out so that he could be places at certain times. I realized that these jailhouse snitches aren't always reliable in telling the truth. They do have access to the news, so it's not always that persuasive, but David knew very crucial information. A forensic scientist found Nathan's DNA on Denise's gear shift, which was interesting since Nathan had said during his initial interview that he had not driven her car in over a year. Another forensic scientist testified that gunshot residue was found on the right cuff of that black hooded sweatshirt in Denise and Nathan's room. Based on these findings, the black sweatshirt was either near a firearm when it was fired or had made contact with an item with gunshot residue. After the state rested, it was time for Nathan's attorney to present their case. The first witness they called was a neighbor of Denise and Nathan's. He said that he saw that suspicious vehicle at least twice on the street that he shared with Denise and Nathan. The defense said somebody else committed this murder and presented evidence regarding other home invasions and burglaries in the area. A detective testified that a series of home invasions followed Denise's murder. Each of these crimes happened within a year. The offenders would enter the home, remove electronics and jewelry, and even made off with the victim's car, just like they did in Denise's case. But my question was, did they kill someone in those cases? After hearing both the state's and the defense's arguments, the trial court ruled that none of these other crimes committed in the area were relevant to Denise's murder. The judge noted that those robberies occurred months after Denise's death. All of those crimes were on the opposite side of town in more densely populated areas. Furthermore, the offenders in the other burglaries tied up the victims, taunted them, looted their homes, and stole their vehicles. But Denise's car was left not far from their home. In the other cases, the cars were left in other counties, far from where the crime was committed. The additional cases did not involve injuries or death. The prosecution and the defense gave their closing arguments. The state's attorney focused on evidence related to motive, the extramarital affair with Anna. Aside from that, they argued that Nathan didn't show any emotion during that video-recorded interview. He didn't even ask what happened to his wife. It only took the jury 2 hours to come back with a guilty verdict on first-degree murder. Nathan appealed his conviction immediately after hearing the verdict. There was a hearing on September 14, 2014 for Nathan's sentence and post-trial motion. The judge denied Nathan's motion for a new trial and sentenced him to 80 years in prison. If he were ever to get out, the judge remanded him to 3 years of mandatory supervised release after the trial. Nathan told Dateline that he was planning on testifying but changed his mind. He said that the state moved beyond the facts of the case and he refused to give them any more fuel. According to Nathan, the cops never looked past him to find the real robber. Nathan also told Dateline that there were insurance claims showing items had been stolen during Denise's murder. I watched this interview and, man, all I can say is that this guy can lie with a straight face. I believe he's as guilty as charged. Nathan just kept on saying, it may not look like a normal burglary, but it was. He was furious that the state had portrayed his relationship with poor Anna as inappropriate. She was just a child. That's right, she was just a child when they met, she was 6. But Nathan said he was just her mentor. He added that when the state accused him of murdering his wife on Valentine's Day as a gift to Anna, that was the harshest statement in the whole trial. He said it was difficult for him to decide what was more sickening, the person who would do it or the person who would suggest it. Regarding that damning note found in Denise's day planner, Nathan said his wife never expressed those feelings to her friends, her parents, or her sisters. She never called the cops or sought counseling. Well, maybe she was embarrassed. Not everyone wants to air their dirty laundry. Nathan explained that if Denise had felt threatened, why didn't she just get a restraining order against him? Denise didn't pursue a restraining order because there was nothing seriously wrong. He didn't want her dead, according to him. Nathan talked about how he felt when he heard the guilty verdict. He said he had the same feeling in the pit of his stomach as he did on Valentine's Day when he learned that Denise had been killed. Probably because now it's his life that's being taken away. At Nathan's sentencing hearing, the judge criticized him for 30 minutes for his actions. The way he murdered Denise inside her family home was shameful. While giving her victim impact statement, Diane expressed the disgust she felt for Nathan's actions. She described her son-in-law as repulsive and evil and said that he had stolen their daughter from them. He actually filed a motion to retain custodial rights over his 3 children, Seth, Julia, and Janelle. Diane and Doug, Denise's mother and father, were given custody, and Nathan's motion was denied. Poor Diane and Doug had to explain to their grandchildren what happened, why Nathan was going to jail, and that he was convicted of murdering their mother. Seth, their oldest child, said to his grandparents, "Everyone makes mistakes." Doug explained that his father had made a very bad decision and how everyone is given choices in life, and Nathan made some extremely poor ones, to say the least. How sad is it for these poor children? I saw that just 8 weeks ago, someone commented on that Faith Baptist Church post from February 19th, 2013, regarding what happened to Denise. Remember that one? I showed it to you. The one that said they were taking up an offering for a fund set up for the children. Someone named Jeff Malott commented. He said Nathan stole the funds meant for the kids and gave it to his mistress after he murdered Denise. It's probably true, considering that he was also collecting funds from the church and spending it on trips, dinners, and hotels. Diane Newton's heart is still breaking. It breaks for her husband, who is still coping with her daughter's murder, and for the children who have to live without their mother and even their father, since he's in jail. Diane said that Doug used to always brag to everyone about how perfect his life was and how happy he was with his children and the families they'd built. The Newton family never anticipated anything like this happening to them, but now Diane knows that bad things can always happen, even to good people.